How are we seated?
I think you are over here. Here?
Okay, so.
Comesa is over here.
Just
inviting us for the ministerial. From what Gloria told me, so they fought
before you flip.
until it was agreed.
It's on already. Hello? Hello?
But I must confess that they've done very well so far. My own assessment, excellent. It's been excellent. So we can forget about these other teething problems and deal with substantive issues.
Exactly. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can they hear me? Hello? Good morning. All right, guys, may I have your attention, please? May I have your attention? We want to start by welcoming everyone on this historic occasion of the first U.S.-Africa Summit to the Growth and Opportunity Forum being hosted by the Office of Congressmember Karen Bass. Representative Bass is on the way, but we're going to go ahead and start our program while she's en route. And I just wanted to first take a moment to mark this historic occasion, the first ever U.S.-Africa Summit with all the heads of state, or nearly all of the heads of state of the African continent being present in the U.S. with us this week. Thank you. Thank you. It's huge. It's huge. And just to give you guys a sense of our idea about today's panel, the Growth and Opportunity in Africa Forum, a big part of what we wanted to do is to talk about trade and investment on the continent, some of the barriers to trade and investment on the continent, but also some of the successes that we've seen in relation to trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa, but even more importantly, in many ways, between African nations themselves. So we want to have today a focus with some high-level panelists from the African Union, some of the chairs of some of the most powerful and effective regional economic communities on the continent to talk about that very issue, to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which rural to urban trade within a nation can be improved and increased, some of the ways in which intra-regional trade between African nations can be improved and increased, and then hopefully following that, that African nations can come fully online in terms of international trade, not only with the United States, but Europe, Asia, and other countries and continents as well. So with that said, I'm going to open it up the program to our illustrious moderator from the Woodrow Wilson Center to kick us off this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adkins. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. No?
How do they know they don't hear you? It's on?
It's on. It's on? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's try that one more time. Good morning, everyone. All right. Well, to open up, I wanted to thank Representative Bass for welcoming us here this morning and for convening today's discussion on critical issues related to growth and opportunity in Africa. As Mr. Adkins said, today's discussion could not be more timely, given the historic U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit that's taking place. And judging by the audience that has filled the capacity of this room, it is clear that this is a discussion that is greatly appreciated and perhaps long overdue. Today's audience represents a broad cross-section that also includes members of the African Diplomatic Corps, U.S. officials, think tanks, civil society, as well as academia, and members of the African diaspora. Let me take this moment to recognize all of the African ambassadors who are present here today. Having worked with you over the last few months, the summit is now here and your hard work is paying off. And we wish great success for the summit. Today, we're focusing our discussion on growth and opportunity in Africa. To help us examine the successes, challenges, and opportunities across Africa in the areas of trade, investment, and development, governance, and peace and security, we have a distinguished panel of thought leaders from Africa's regional bodies, from the African Union and 2 of its regional economic communities, the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, COMESA, and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. I was just telling our distinguished guests back in the holding room that those of us who have worked Africa issues over the last 20 or so years know their place and role, and we could not have found a better panel of people to discuss these issues. These are people who have dedicated their careers and their lives to economic development, to peace and security on the African continent. So I'm really hoping for a good discussion around these issues because there couldn't be any better people to discuss this with us. Let me take a few minutes to introduce myself. I am Ndamuyangwa, the director of the Africa program at the Woodrow Wilson Center here in Washington, D.C. And in my capacity as moderator, let me just take a few minutes to frame today's discussion, and then I'll open it up to our panel. Growth and opportunity, 2 words that are not often associated with Africa. Many of us in this room know that the dominant narrative about Africa is negative. For many, Africa is defined by conflict, by poor governance, by poor human rights records, and by a lack of a rule of law. But those of us who have worked Africa for a long time know that there is much, much more to Africa than just this. That this dominant narrative masks some of the key transformation and development that Africa has been undergoing over the last 20 years. And that growth and opportunity for Africa's peoples and for our partners exists within this transformation. The truth is that Africa is a diverse and complex continent of over 50 countries, 54, and there's good and bad within the continent. From my perspective, as I look at Africa over the last 20 years, I see some broad trends and trajectories that represent great opportunity for Africa and our people. On the economic front, we all know that Africa is home to 6 of the fastest growing economies in the world. Both the challenge and the opportunity for Africa, from my perspective, will be translating that growth into development for Africa's people. On the governance front, since the second wind of change blew across Africa in the 1990s, we have seen the expansion of democratic governance across the continent. And what we see in the Africa of 2014 is not the Africa of 1989. Several countries have held 4 or 5 cycles of elections since then. Incumbents have been voted out of office in some countries, and many have left, allowing for a smooth transition within the democratic process. Having said that, we all know that challenges remain. There has been a backsliding of democracy in some countries, and procedural democracy has taken hold, but there is need to do more on what I call qualitative democracy. On the peace and security front, yes, challenges remain. 9 of 16 UN peacekeeping missions are in Africa. That's way too many. And yet, over the last 15 years, we have seen Africa, especially the African Union and the RECs, take the lead on developing Africa's peace and security architecture. Today, we see Africa not just as a consumer of peace, but also a contributor to peace around the world. Eleven of the top 20 troop-contributing countries to UN peacekeeping missions are in Africa. Africa has also begun to deploy its own peacekeeping missions. And today, we see more of the hybrid green helmets and blue helmets missions. I also see a continent that's setting the pace on the inclusion of women in the security sector. Okay. I've been asked to speak up just a little bit. I also see a continent that's setting the pace on the inclusion of women in the security sector. With Namibia leading the charge, 40% of Namibia's peacekeeping troops are made up of women. And on the political front, we have Rwanda leading the charge with 60% of the women parliamentarians and #1 spot in the world. So from my perspective, a complex continent, challenges across the economic spectrum, the political spectrum, and the development, the peace and security spectrum. But nonetheless, when we look at the broad trends and trajectories, we see great opportunities for Africa and for our partners. With that, let me turn to our panel. As I mentioned earlier, we have 3 distinguished panelists today. His Excellency Erastus Mwencha, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, who is originally from Kenya. His Excellency Sindisa Ngwenya, Secretary General of the Common Market of East and Southern Africa, COMESA, who is originally from Zimbabwe. And His Excellency Kade Ouedraogo, President of the Commission of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, who is from Burkina Faso. I will ask the panelists a set of questions and allow each of them to respond to the question. We have asked each of them to speak for no more than 3 minutes to each question so we can allow maximum time for question and answer with the audience towards the end of our session here this morning. To begin, let me ask our 3 panelists to take 3 minutes to just very quickly introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about the mission of their organization, and to share their general efforts and concern about larger growth and opportunity issues in Africa. Mr. Mwencha, you first.
Thank you very much, Monde. And having listened to you, I thought that the audience would have just clapped and we say, well, the job is done. But obviously, you need us to do more to convince the distinguished panel that is here. And I see a number of honorable ministers, ambassadors, and the rest of good friends that have come to join us. Well, describing the African Union can take a long time. But I think I'm just going to remind you some 5 points that you could take away. One, African Union role has been changing. But the key area that we're now focusing is on integration. That is point number 1. Number 2 is development. And development, there are a number of key, I would call continental flagship programs that we're implementing, starting from agriculture, which is really the mainstay of the continent. There is infrastructure, there is science and technology, and the human resource sector, the core being the human resource sector because Africa is about its people. The third one is peace and security. The fourth is dialogue with the rest of the world. We are here in the name of the African Union, and we do that with many other strategic partners around the world. And the fifth one is setting normative standards. You've just mentioned human rights, governance, and so on. So this is really the African Union. Now, what are the key concerns of the continent? The key concerns of the continent, I would narrow them to 2. First is peace, the second is development. And in the continent we say, without any of those, it is like an aeroplane flying with 1 wing. And so with the peace, you can have development. With development, you can have peace. That is where we focus on. And of course, if you look at the continent, which you have aptly described at the moment, it is changing. But unfortunately, we still have the old narrative that people see Africa as a country. But Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent that is highly complex, but a continent that is dynamic, a continent that is assuming its rightful place in the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mwencha. Mr. Ngwenya.
Thank you very much. Let me simply say all protocol observed, since we have got 3 minutes, and then proceed to say what is COMESA's mission. The Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa's strategy for economic integration and development is what we call market integration strategy that is based on trade and investment. That's the first thing. Secondly, to say that the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa has a free trade area. It's 19 countries, a free trade area that became operational in 2000 and which has seen trade increase from $3.1 billion to $20 billion as we speak. Tremendous growth. But what is interesting about that trade, and I've got some of the captains of industry, I can see them in this room, is that it has benefited the... Yes. Sorry? Okay, now you give me another 30 seconds there because I was told that I use the microphone need to be better. So I was saying that, you know, although we have a free trade area, the most important outcome of that is not trade. It is that we have seen an increase in number of that trade is in manufactured, you know, products. In fact, I've got some industrialists that are here, like Mr. Bitko. I can see you over there. You can stand up. He is now operating in 15 countries, whereas when we started, he was in a couple of countries. What does that tell you? It tells you that through market integration, we are beginning to have our own, what were national champions that are now regional, you know, champions. And for those from outside the region, if they are business people who are here, investors who are here, I can say that there is no better place to invest in a place where you have companies that were national that are now regional companies that are becoming multinational companies. The second point, very quickly, about COMESA is that it has got a wide array of institutions that provide trade and project financing. We have the PTA, Trade and Development Bank, which of course works with Exim Bank, with OPIC, etc. In fact, when you look at most of the procurement of aircraft from Boeing, they are done by the PTA Bank and Exim Bank. But we also have the Trade Insurance Agency that provides political and commercial risk guarantees. I can go on and go on and go on. Suffice to say, as I have 1 minute, because you give me another 30 seconds, that we also as COMESA are part of what we call COMESA, the East African Community and the Southern African Community a tripartite arrangement. And in fact, by the end of this year, we hope to launch a free trade area, one single free trade area with common rules of origin for the 27 countries, that is half of the African Union membership, with a combined GDP of $1.3 trillion. If it was one country, I would say that it would rank 13th in the world in terms of GDP, with a combined population of 625 million people, and which will also serve as a basis for the launch of the continental free trade area. So this is what I can say, since I know that I'm time up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngwenya. Mr. Wadrago, about West Africa and ECOWAS.
Thank you, Monde, and let me thank the organizers for associating ECOWAS to this topic discussion. I just want to say briefly that ECOWAS is a grouping of 15 member states of West Africa, created in 1975. And during the 90s, realizing the intrinsic link between economic development and political stability, based on the lesson drawn by the Liberian Civil War, the ECOWAS Treaty was revised to provide for a second pillar, that is the political cooperation, making it a grouping that promotes economic cooperation, but also political integration. The treaty was later on revised in 1993 to include a certain level of supranationality. Therefore, the then Executive Secretariat was transformed into a commission, and we have given a mandate to promote economic integration in West Africa. So let me briefly say the priority of our community. First and for all, maintain peace, security, and stability in the region. Second, build a strong regional market through liberalization of movement of persons and goods. 3, promote sound regional infrastructure. 4, ensure food security and develop agricultural production. 5, develop human resources. And 6, capacity building. But of course, we count on the cooperation of all our partners to integrate our economies to the global trade. So this is the objectives of ECOWAS, and the head of states have developed what we call the Vision 2020, which is to create a borderless region and a peaceful region where every individual is free to develop his potentials. So these are the main objectives of ECOWAS, and I thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much to all 3 of you. Let me take some time and ask a question about, as you look across Africa in general, but more closely at the regions that you work in, can you highlight 2 or 3 examples that make you hopeful about Africa's economic development and human security? And here I'm talking about the human security of ordinary African citizens, the stuff that makes them feel secure on a day-to-day basis in terms of their personal security, access to food, access to education. So what are some of those things that make you hopeful about the trajectory that Africa is on? I'll start with Mr. Ngwenya this time around and move it down the table. Mr. Ngwenya.
Well, thank you very much. I think with regard to 2 or 3 examples that make us hopeful, let's start with the issue of food security. Because without food security, you cannot have human security. It is that through the African Union, we have the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, which is also being implemented by the regional economic communities as the delivery vehicles for the African Union. And what we have seen there is that the countries that have signed the cut-up compacts, that also have got cut-up national investment plans, is that they've increased investment in agriculture. And we do expect that the objective of realizing a food self-sufficient and secure, region in terms of commerce and continent for Africa will be realized in the coming years. The second one, of course, is that what you mentioned yourself in terms of multi-party, democracy, because you cannot talk about the security of the individuals without that political dimension. And what is happening there is that with the liberalization of politics, the liberalization of the economies, you find that the individuals, at an individual level, they are able to make choices about what they want to do. And this perhaps explains one thing which is dominant in our region, that most of the cross-border trade is not what I mentioned in my statistics. 40% of it, unrecorded, is done by informal cross-border traders. But what we have also found, incidentally, is that that cross-border trade is not only limited to the countries within Africa, because you'll find that it is also the cross-border trade that is done between, let's say, Asia and countries in Africa. So that also tells you that there is development there. Then the other issue, of course, that we have got to deal with is the issue of health. We know that the issue of the HIV pandemic has been worse in our part of the world, but measures have been taken to address that. And thanks also to the TRIPS agreement under the WTO, which makes it possible to manufacture these essential drugs, we think that will also contribute to the improvement of reducing the AIDS pandemic. I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moncha.
Well, looking at Africa, particularly on the peace and security sector, this is one area that we can say there is a lot of hope in the continent. And thanks to the effort, as you said yourself in introductory remarks, that Africa is no longer a consumer of peace, but also a maker of peace. In fact, Africa has shown leadership in terms of leading to bring peace in the continent. If you flash your mind back to 10, 15 years ago, Africa was literally at war with itself. But today, although you mentioned that Africa has got 9 out of 16 missions globally, are in Africa. I think it's important to say that in all these 9, Africa is providing leadership, but much of Africa, in fact, statistics will tell you that 90% of Africa is now peaceful. It's only about 10% that is worrying us, and that is what catches the headlines. And so there is a lot of hope that Africa is consolidating the area of peace and security. The second one, and I think this is what Cindy has talked about, is to see Africa now growing. And part of that growth comes from 3 factors that I should mention. The first one is that Africa has shown leadership in macroeconomic discipline. If you look at what has happened, especially with the global economic crisis that we had 2 years, 3 years ago, this storm was not in Africa. And why? It is because Africa has entrenched macroeconomic discipline. The second one, we have an expanding middle-class income in Africa, which is becoming a source of growth. You now see about 300 million Africans that form a consumer base, and this is expanding. The third one, there is global demand for Africa because Africa is the place for investment. Africa is attractive in terms of returns, and so people want to do business with Africa. Coupled with that, there is high demand for Africa's product. And one can name a few products that Africa, if you think of each one of us in this room, I could imagine, has got a cell phone. And that cell phone will have a product coming from Africa. And one can go on. It can't come from elsewhere in the world. That means Africa is now globally linked. The question is, under what terms is Africa linked? And this is what we should concentrate on, because Africa has remained on the low end of doing business. Yesterday somebody was saying, where we were in the ministerial meeting of AGOA, that take the case of coffee that was given. That in Africa, coffee's price is about 6 billion. But globally, coffee price is 100 billion. And that 94 billion is made outside Africa. So if we address this issue, then we'll be talking about equitable growth globally. The fifth point I should talk about is what Cindy has mentioned, integration. In fact, much of growth, although growth of trade globally has doubled, Africa trade is also growing. The only difference is that it's not growing as fast as the rest of the world with trade with Africa is. But it's not a question of glass being half full. It is a question of the fact that the demand for the raw materials, for Africa's raw materials is higher than the demand for, manufactured goods. And this is an area that we should be working on. And the fourth factor is technology. Technology is catching place in Africa. A lot of technology now, whether you talk of soft technology from mobile technology to others, Africa is also getting to the frontier of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Woodruff, no, you're good now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think the first asset of ECOWAS is certainly the political will of our leaders. They are now determined to accelerate the pace of integration in West Africa. And this is the reason why we were able to make progress in unifying our region. As you may know, in West Africa, we have a common ECOWAS passport for all the 15 countries. We move around without any visa across the 15 countries. And we have a liberalized market. And you know that we have become a customs union since the 25th October 2013, where our head of states have adopted our common external tariff, making us a customs union. We were able then to negotiate partnership, especially with the European Union, with the Economic Partnership Agreement. And now we are about to sign this afternoon the framework for trade and investment agreement with the United States. So I think this is a very great progress. And the potential of ECOWAS is fabulous. We have a growth rate of about 7% a year for the region. And the region is blessed with many potentials in agriculture, in mining, in services. So there is a lot of investment opportunities in West Africa. But I must stress also that one of the assets of ECOWAS is maintenance of peace and stability in the region. Thanks to the unity of the region, we were able to overcome all the major crises we have witnessed in our region, be the crisis of Liberia, crisis of Sierra Leone, crisis of Cote d'Ivoire, and recently the crisis in Mali and in Guinea-Bissau. Our crisis prevention and management mechanism have rendered us capable of overcoming all these obstacles. And I must emphasize also that we are making progress in building regional infrastructure, highways, air transport, maritime transport, and also telecommunication, and above all, energy, which is a very key factor for development in West Africa. We are now putting emphasis on development and exchange of energy among our member states. I believe that with all these assets, we can work to achieve a peaceful region that will be a fast-growing region. I am quite confident in the future of ECOWAS because definitely the ECOWAS have a young and dynamic population, and it is now up to us to provide with policies that should be conducive to economic development and prosperity. And I believe that this is the determination of our head of states and government, and the ECOWAS Commission and all our institutions are plainly determined to work so that we can achieve these goals in the near future.
Thank you. Let me just take a quick moment to recognize and acknowledge Congress member Karen Bass, who made all of this possible. Thank you. I have been given my marching orders to move this along, but here's where I get myself into trouble. So I am listening to our distinguished panelists, and they have just given us a really good picture of some of the positive developments that are ongoing in Africa. But the truth is, Africa has a branding problem. So Brand Africa is somewhat little known. What you're describing here is news to many people. Brand Africa is somewhat tarnished. Brand Africa is not as attractive to outside partners as Brand Asia, Brand, you name it. And so if there's one thing that you would put out there to fix Brand Africa, what would it be? Just one thing in 1 minute. I will start from my brother here and move it down the table. Mr. Wadrago.
Yes, first of all, let me take that, as Mwencha said, Africa is not a country. It is a continent. Therefore, sometimes when you hear that something happened in one country, people tend to extend it to all the 54 countries, which is not true. Africa has brilliant success story, although sometimes we have our shortcomings. But overall, we can say that Africa is making progress. We have a lovely and dynamic population. We have a beautiful and strong culture, and based on which I believe that the future of Africa is bright. We are blessed with many potentials, and most of our countries are making tremendous progress. But unfortunately, this project was overshadowed by some crises, but crises arrive everywhere in the world. It is not specific to Africa. But I believe that Africa globally is making progress, and Africa is a great and beautiful continent.
Thank you. Mr. Moncho, what would you fix?
Well, thank you, Monda. Let me also join, first of all, in thanking Representative Catherine Bass for our commitment to Africa, but also for facilitating this important meeting here. Well, Mon, that is a very difficult question. And I think it's difficult because it has two angles. There is the consumer aspect of what you might call the news what makes news. But there is also from what you might call the source, that the source is not also energy, doesn't have energy enough to change the narrative. And let me then start from, first of all, the source. If you look at what is happening globally, take, say, the case of Asia, and look at some of the things that happen there. Take one or two countries in Asia. If you look at, say, Thailand, there have been more coups in Thailand, but each year I still see tourists going to Thailand. I see no news headlines talking about what is happening in Asia. There are more, what do you call it, piracy programs in that part of hijackings daily and so forth. But unfortunately, this is not what carries the day. It's different. It is about the energy that is in that region, the growth that is taking place in that region. So it is a problem from the source that from Africa, we are not talking enough about our own success stories. The second one, and as I said, it is about the consumer. Africa doesn't have the tools to be able to talk about Africa. The tools that talk about Africa are instruments that are from outside Africa. Africa doesn't have those instruments. And because of that, they tend to give the consumer what they see as news. If there is one incident in one country, as my colleague from West Africa said, that's what carries the day. But that's not Africa. And so there is a problem here. But I think that narrative is changing. Because each time now I see, whether it is since the economists changed this narrative 5 years ago, saying the hopeless continent is no longer the dark continent, but a bright continent. This story is being repeated. Let's have more of these repetitions. Because if we start feeding the world, if we start showing that Africa is the best area for capital return, this narrative will change. Unfortunately, it's a process, it's not an event.
Mr. Ngwenya, 1 minute to close us off here before we open it up.
Let me take it up from what Erastus has said. Who writes the narrative for Africa? The narrative for Africa is written from outside. 2000, we have got the economists saying Africa is a hopeless continent. 2013, Africa, a rising Africa, a rising continent. So if you were to ask me in 1 minute, what should we do to plant Africa? I would say that we, the Africans, need to plant Africa by telling the narrative that is positive, so that it counters the negative aspect. I thank you.
Thank you. I think what we'll do now, I know there are a lot of questions from the audience, is we will open it up to Q&A with our panelists. And I would ask that you please keep your questions short and to the point. There is a mic, I think 3 mics? One here. Okay, there's 4 mics. So if you would just please get up and line up behind a mic, I'll acknowledge you. We'll take the questions. Please keep them short. We'll take 3 at a time. So I'll start from over there and work it across this way. Madam.
Good morning. My name is Mojuba Olufunke Okome, and I teach political science and African studies and women's studies at Brooklyn College in New York. And I'm a Nigerian. I am encouraged by the positive assessment that I've heard. As a Nigerian woman, peace and security and human security are important. I am highly concerned about Boko Haram, and I'm also distressed about, I'm going to get to my question, about the response, the West Africa response to this. And part of my distress is that it was France that brought the West African leaders together to discuss what their response was going to be. So what is ECOWAS doing about Boko Haram? as a response? And how is this connecting with the mission of ECOWAS and its intent in solving the problem of peace and security and its connection with governance issues in West Africa?
Thank you, sir.
Oh.
Please keep it short so we can get as many in.
The name is Somi Akimulero. I'm the president of the African Chamber of Commerce, reside in Dallas, Texas. 3 questions, very short.
No, one, sir, please. Work with me. Work with me. Look behind you. Look behind you. Please work with me. One, short.
Short, in 1 minute.
Yeah.
3. In 1 minute. 1. 2001, in Dakar, Senegal, under AGOA, and I believe this leadership summit is part of AGOA that was embedded into it, but this is the first time we're realizing it. Some of the problems that we're talking today, I don't know if we're prioritizing them, and one of them is infrastructure. We can talk from now till tomorrow. We discussed it 2001, we're at 2014. We have 1,085 cities in Africa, only less than 52 that has relatively electricity guarantee, probably for 18 hours a day. Without power, energy, we can't do anything. We can come here and drink and eat donut and go back. Next year, we'll do the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
So, well.
I get your question. Your question has to do with what we can do to enhance infrastructure across the continent in order to realize the continent's full potential. Sir.
Yes. My name is Imran Umar, and I'm Executive Director of IIPC, International Interfaith Peace Corps, here in Hendon, Virginia. My question is, what is the role of education in growth and opportunities in Africa, given that Africa as a continent is still lagging behind the rest of the world, regions of the world, in terms of education in general, and in particular, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Is the AU or any of the regional organizations doing anything about that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll turn it over to our speakers. If you could please just take a minute, touch on 1 or 2 of the questions, and we'll go down, and then we'll open it down for another question. So the first one had to do with Boko Haram and the ECOWAS response, or lack thereof. The second question had to do with poor infrastructure in Africa and how that's impacting growth and opportunity. And the third question had to do with the role of education in realizing Africa's full potential. Mr. Ouedraogo.
Thank you, and let me reaffirm the total solidarity of ECOWAS to the government and people of Nigeria in their fight against terrorism, and especially against Boko Haram. The question is what ECOWAS is doing to face this situation. And I want to just inform you that soon after the abduction of the 200 girls in Chibok, President John Dramani Mahama, who is the current chairman of ECOWAS, paid a visit to President Goodluck Jonathan Ebele to convey to him the total solidarity of ECOWAS to Nigeria to combat Boko Haram. And immediately after, he convened in Accra all the chiefs of intelligence services of all the ECOWAS member states. And they did come with cooperation measures that certainly we do not have to disclose here. And later on, there was an extraordinary summit of ECOWAS devoted to the terrorist action in the northern part of Nigeria and the northern part of Mali. This summit was held in Accra on the 30th of May this year. It came with strong resolutions and decisions. And you may know also that the last ECOWAS summit held in Accra on the 10th of July also addressed this issue of Boko Haram. And we have adopted what we call a counter-terrorist strategy in ECOWAS, which we are implementing now together with the Nigerian government. I want to assure you that ECOWAS is doing a lot to counter terrorist activity in our region, and especially to counter the activities of Boko Haram.
Thank you.
There was another aspect that you alluded to when you asked the question about the Boko Haram, that it is France that had to come and intervene in the case of Mali, and that Africa was kind of flat-footed. It's true. But Africa has not stopped there. Although we had put in place a mechanism for the African Peace and Security Architecture, and which is still under construction and will be fully operational from next year, we had not developed instruments for what we called a rapid response mechanism. Because when a coup takes place, you just can't move in without adequate preparations. But I can tell you from the experience of what we saw in the case of Mali, the African leaders have taken this issue up and put in place a mechanism for rapid response. A number of countries have offered their own forces. We now have a doctrine, a command structure that Africa can move immediately if there was such an issue, unlike what caught us in the case of Mali. Now let me move to the question of Sami. Sami, you said, well, in Dakar 2001, and I was there, we agreed on what should be done in the area of infrastructure. What has happened? A lot has happened. And I'm sure, Sami, you need to visit Africa more then. Because if you look at the number of projects, in fact, today we have over almost 1,000 projects in Africa in infrastructure. Some of them are interconnecting links between the member states, and they are worth billions, and they are moving. In West Africa, there are gas projects. We have Inga now that is moving. We have regional connections. We have grids that have connected. So there are programs that are moving. But we are not saying that we have done it, because that still remains the major handicap for the cost of doing business in Africa. If I move to the last question that was asked about education, and let's first of all thank you for the work that the Peace Corps are doing. And actually, that is really the fundamental. I did mention in the introductory remarks that the major resource that we have in Africa is its people, the human resource, out of which the youth, which constitute over 600 million, the focus is to give them skills. We have already seen education in terms of access to education, primary enrollment, and the rest. But what we want now to do is give education that people can be able to start their own business. So education, indeed, is the priority number one.
Just to put a quick footnote on infrastructure, to say perhaps this is why I said we should tell our own story. Let not the story be told by people from outside. A lot is happening in infrastructure. If you look at Africa, up to a couple of years ago, we did not have any railway network. As I talk, thousands and thousands of kilometers of railways are being built to connect, the countries. This was not the case. If you look at energy, like what he has said, we now have got the power pools. We have the Southern African power pool, we have got the East African power pool, and they are all working on integrating the energies. And if you look at the power generation itself, estimates are that we shall have, excluding the Inga, about 30,000 megawatts of power by 2018. The Grand Inga itself has got a potential for 38,000 megawatts of power. Currently, the project is ongoing for 4,500 megawatts of power. So there's a lot that is happening. And this is why I said perhaps we need ourselves to tell, the story of what is going on. Because when you listen to the story from outside, it is always negative, even if we are making quite a lot. But let me also say one thing here, since it's not only limited to infrastructure, to say that our own governments are also raising bonds, which they are using, infrastructure bonds, which they are using to finance infrastructure. But you should also take into account that this problem of infrastructure is not only limited to Africa, but also in terms of what our development partners could do. If you look at agriculture, you look at infrastructure, until a couple of years ago again, when, thanks to the African Union and the new Partnership for Africa's Development, there was no consensus in terms of the importance of infrastructure. It's only now that everybody is now coming to realize the importance of that. So I thought I should just comment on infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more round, and I know there's a fourth mic over there, so I'll start over there. Please, please keep it short. Let's go, sir.
Thank you. The name is Sakato DJ Joel. I'm the program officer for the International Trade Union Confederation of the ITUC. We are based in Lomé, Togo. We represent 17 million working men and women in Africa. My question for the comrade brother from COMESA, you talked about the opportunities around democracy, multi-party democracy. Swaziland is also within the COMESA. Swaziland is not a multi-party democracy. Political parties are banned in Swaziland. Human rights activists are clamped into jail. AGOA has been suspended for Swaziland. What does that mean for trade opportunities? The African Union, what's the strategy to fight tax haven? And we hear from the ECOWAS just now that there's a trade and investment agreement that is to be signed. What are the decent work components that are, should be into this? Women do not have opportunities when growth do come. What is it that we think will represent that kind of opportunity for women? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you snuck in more than one question in there, but that's good. Let's keep it. I'll come to my sister over here. Please, keep it short, please.
I'll try to keep it very short. The first is clarification, moving with goods and services around Africa without visa. When I am a Sierra Leonean, I can't go to South Africa without a visa. I need clarification. And my question is, I'm Gladys Branch. I'm coming from Sierra Leone, and I represent the workers' group in this meeting. That's the Trade Union Council. What is your take in the issue of Africa becoming the fastest growing economic continent when the citizens are living under $1.25 a day, and it is not reflected in the life of the people? They go to bed at night without electricity, no pure drinking water. We talk about food security. Our government are signing policies with investors that people, the citizen does not understand, and they take away the lands, and we cannot grow our food, and you talk about self-sufficiency in terms of food. What is your take in that?
Thank you. Take one question here.
My name is Abi Asekon. I'm the President CEO of Keda Aero. My question is a follow-up to Dr. Monde's question earlier. You asked a question that's, what will be the major or one issue that confronts Africa if we have to say it's a problem? And my dear brother answered that question in a political way. So the question is, what will be the major issue? I will say it is leadership, because if leadership is right, everything else will come behind it.
Thank you. All right, so we have several questions here, and I'll turn it over to my brothers here for a response. One, which I missed most of, had to do with AGOA and some of the challenges that countries face in terms of participating in AGOA and the impact on neighboring countries and others when a country is suspended. We talked about opportunities, economic opportunities for women, how Africa can better realize those opportunities for women. My sister from Sierra Leone raised some questions about barriers to intra-Africa trade, particularly for the small-size industry and individual-owned businesses in Africa, and especially when you're crossing from one region to another. And then there was also a question about the translation of Africa's growth into development, that Africa is lagging behind in this area, and what can we do to better translate those economic gains into development that benefits ordinary African citizens. And then I think the fifth and final point my brother raised up front here was about what I would term in shorthand the leadership deficit on the continent and what to do to fix. Pick one.
So the choice will be difficult, but let me touch on maybe two. Okay. The first one, I want to address the issue of AGOA and opportunity for women. So I must say that yesterday we have been discussing with the ministers of trade how to revise AGOA and make it more inclusive and more beneficial for African development. And I think that good resolutions have come up with the discussion of Minister of Trade. But what I want to address is the opportunity for women. If I take the example of ECOWAS, we attach a very great importance to the gender issue. This is the reason why our community has created what we call the Gender Center based in Dakar, which is to promote opportunity for women through training, through financial support, and also through positive discrimination. So that is to allow women to take their rightful place in the development effort of our member states. Let me turn now to the contradiction, the seeming contradiction between fast-growing economies and poor people. And to just remind that it is right that Africa has resumed with fast-growing economies this recent year. But it is necessary to maintain this growth rate during a long period for it to be translated into economic gains for our population. You need a sustained growth, not only for 3 or 4 or 5 years. You need this for a longer period. And this is why we are working to make this growth a sustainable one. Secondly, the growth has to be inclusive. And if you take, some of our countries, the growth rate is led by the mining sector or some isolated sector who do not have enough connection with the local economy. So we have to work to diversify the sources of growth of our economies and make the growth more inclusive so that we can create a middle class, so that we can promote consumer activities and also to feed investment and trade in our region. But I believe that the responsibility of the regional groupings is to create this conducive environment for investment and growth so that in a longer period we'll be able to address the poverty situation in our region. But I can assure you that the poverty level is going down in our country. We are making progress, although these progress are slow. But we want to accelerate, but the only way you can accelerate is first of all to have a peaceful and democratic region, and therefore you promote regional market through infrastructure and liberalization and trade facilitation. And this is what our countries are doing.
Thank you. And I think my brother here has touched on all the core issues. But I think underlying the comment from my sister over there was the sense that these resources perhaps are not being put into national coffers. So it's addressing that big, dreaded corruption word. Yeah. And so I think that was one of the issues she wanted for all of you to touch on. That was the reassurance to the ordinary African citizens that even as these monies come into the continent, that they will ultimately be used for the benefit of the people, what measures are being taken to tackle the big C, the corruption issue.
Yeah, this is an area of concern to the continent, and at the level of the African Union, concerned that illicit capital flows at the moment constitute about $60 billion that is leaving the continent annually is of great concern. And because of that, the heads of state and government decided to set up a study team to look at how we can combat this under the leadership of President Mbeki, former president of South Africa. This study has virtually been completed, and I hope that as an outcome even of this meeting, we can agree with Washington to set up a mechanism on how to combat this issue, because most of these resources which leave Africa are residing somewhere. They are not maturing the continent. And if we can work with our partners, the European Union, the US, we can retain these resources within Africa. It can also discourage those that send these resources, but they are also being done, most of these illicit capital flows, not by Africans, but by also even investors from the countries of origin and other sources. So this is one area that is of concern, and we have taken it head on. And a lot could be said about that. Let me go back to the question that was raised about AGOA. And since Representative Catherine is here, I think it's important to talk about it in a business-like manner. First of all, many of us have taken a position all a long time that, and we should underline this very clearly, no one should underrate the issue of human rights, democracy, and all those human security issues. But Africa has a history. Just like the global history is here with us. We know where we have come from. We have come from many other facets of life, whether it was colonialism, whether it was slave trade. We have that history, and you cannot erase it over one night. And as we move in this line of improving human life, we must then put our priorities in a certain context. Now, let me come to the point of AGOA. In AGOA, AGOA is a very important instrument, but let's safeguard it. If I am an investor that have invested in country X, and a leader in that country X has a problem, why must I be punished? And this is where one of the weaknesses of AGOA, we are saying, don't withdraw AGOA provisions because you have had a problem at the level, political level. Let's create an instrument that can deal with these issues. And we are saying we can have dialogue with the US where we talk about issues of human rights and the rest, but let us not mix them with the business, because this is one of the weaknesses. That's why we cannot see American investors. If you look at America, it's edged out in Africa in terms of investment. But how are you going to invest in a regime you don't know whether it will be there tomorrow? If a leader coughs and something goes wrong, it is withdrawn. So let's find a mechanism that we can save AGOA from this kind of regime.
Thank you. Mr. Ngwenya.
Well, let me start with the issue of Swaziland. I will be very direct. It was asked. Let me say at two levels. Yes, Swaziland has got a constitutional monarchy. That's a fact. But secondly, that Swaziland has got competitive politics. I see members of parliament and ministers being changed whenever there are elections. But as to whether or not it is the existence of multi-party systems which is good for that country, I do not know. But all I can say is that if democracy is people exercising their choice to select who represents them, therefore at least they meet those minimum requirements. Because at times we get confused about democracy. We don't even at times separate democracy from mobocracy, or even mobocracy and democracy from thugocracy, which is my own formulation, where you can have a rule by a thug, who is the head of state. Now, let me then move very quickly and say the following on this issue of AGOA. To say that AGOA, yes, is very important, but I think the question that was raised with respect to women, economic empowerment, their participation in the economy, I think this must be addressed head-on in the enhanced AGOA. And I think through Exim Bank and other institutions, we should have financing for women entrepreneurs, because women account for 80% of production in our economies. But the problem that we have, again, as Erastus indicated, is historical, in that the commercial banks will not give loans. And this is why we're working on women economic empowerment funds, including guarantees, for that. I will not go into the details of that one. Let me move very quickly to the issue of the illicit flows. To say that, again, the narrative of illicit flows tells us that it is the corrupt African leaders that are taking the money out. Yes, it is true that there are those who have taken the money out, but it is true that most of the illicit financial flows, if you look at President Begi's report, of more than 80 billion, which is more than the development assistance given by development partners, it's as a result of mispricing, as a result of transfer pricing by multinational companies, particularly in the mining sector. You have a situation whereby, you are talking about inclusive growth, a situation whereby they don't pay taxes, whereby they will even say, I contracted a company in country X, offshore, to provide services for $500 million, and you have got no way of checking that. And my appeal is that those countries in the OECD should not pay lip service to the issue of mispricing, of transfer pricing, because it is directly contributing, to poverty. I thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will take one more question.
Yep.
One more question. But to the rest of you, and I know many of you have been standing in the queue there for a while, I've just been informed that you will have an opportunity to ask questions in the next panel. So please forgive me that I wasn't able to get to you. But just one short, quick question. I think I was going that way. Sorry, I was going that way. I have to be fair. All right, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Muthaura. I'm the Acting Chief Executive of the Capital Markets Authority of Kenya. We're the Securities and Exchange Commission equivalent in Kenya. Now, touching on the comments that were made around branding of the continent, I think the question is, do we need to move away from trying to brand the continent to branding countries and regions? The challenge we seem to have is with the lack of very specific data that can be analyzed, which you can't do at continental level. It really lends itself to a lot of the generalizations that affect the continent. And then the secondary is now when we talk of owning our own narrative, when we look at really the consolidation of ownership of global media, what are the real opportunities and chances for Africa to really own its own narrative when we look at the trends going on globally on the management of international media? Thank you.
I didn't hear a question in there. I heard more of a solution. That's good.
Yeah.
You are forward-leaning, looking to the future, and looking to what we can do. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will turn it over to our panelists and just give them a minute each for final thoughts and issues and just close it off. Mr. Wadrago.
I just want to stress that this historic summit between Africa and United States is, for us, a very huge opportunity to promote growth, development, and therefore peace in Africa. And we should seize this opportunity. But for us to be able to seize this opportunity, I think we must continue to work hard to build peaceful, stable, and democratic nations. And this is our primary responsibility, because without peace and stability, there is no economic development. I should want to wish that this AGOA, if revised, should be an AGOA that should promote partnership between Africa and the United States, a partnership that will be conducive to inclusive development for our citizens and our population. So this will be my conclusion word. I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Musa, or do you want to go last as the AU? I'll go to the regional economic communities first, and then I'll come to you. Mr. Sindise, please.
Thank you very much. My last thought on this, but before that, just to say to the colleague from the Capital Market Authority of Kenya that even if you try to brand the regions, unless we also brand the continent, the narrative out there will still be of one country being the entire continent. But let me now move to my thoughts. My thoughts are as follows. AGOA enhancement is important, 15 years to provide predictability, stability, certainty, especially for the private sector, is absolutely essential. Secondly, what is it that we are looking for in terms of an enhanced AGOA? We are looking for rules of origin that will allow not only accumulation, but also allow trade, qualification under rules of origin for intermediate products. Just like what Secretary Kerry said yesterday in terms of South Africa. Oh, how can it be up? No, you're not being fair to me. Let me just finish this. Just like what he said, he gave an example of what Ford Motor Company does in South Africa, and also what is happening in this country in terms of the intermediate components that are traded. So we need to do that. To do that for the simple reason that globalization is no longer based on each country producing 100% of everything, but of producing certain components that are put together. The other thing that we are looking for is the issue of SME, support, particularly financing, because if we are going to attach, to empower women and bring them into the mainstream, not of our economies, but of trade and AGOA, transfer the technology, the skills, therefore we need to have that one done. Last but not least is the issue of the withdrawal of preferences, simply to say, with the permission of Erastus here, that we need in this partnership to have what I call mutual accountability. Mutual accountability in the sense that when there is a problem in Africa, the African Union is there to address those issues and resolve them through their peer review mechanism and other architecture that has been set up. Because if America does it unilaterally, it is seen to be using the big stick as a superpower to do that. So we must also deal with that issue of perception by allowing that mutual accountability to work through the African Union Commission. I thank you.
Mr. Mwancha.
Thank you very much, Monde. The relationship between Africa and the United States has been captured under AGOA, but we know that the AGOA instrument is not perfect. And I think as we now move forward, let us look at what is working well in AGOA and what is not working well, that we can make it a more robust instrument that can elevate our relationship to be one that will address Africa's development challenges. And the development challenge in Africa, first of all, as Kadri, my friend, has said, let us make sure that Africa is at peace with itself and the rest of the world. Secondly, Africa wants real transformation. We can have growth like what has been said, but growth that is not touching the African. And that transformational growth will require investment. The investment US has got technology. And so in restructuring AGOA, let us look at the issue of investment in AGOA, make it stable, that it will be able to attract and get Africa to join the global supply chain and also global business chain. That is when Africa will be linked in a structured manner to the global economy. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, let me turn the mic over to Representative Bass to just close us off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, wasn't this a fabulous panel? Why don't we have a round of applause for our panelists and our moderator? Thank you very much. We're very honored for your presence today. Welcome, everyone. I'm sorry I wasn't here at the beginning of the program, but I wanted to take a moment and to welcome you to this day where we're going to examine development, the success, and the challenges on the continent from a regional perspective. You know, when the summit was planned, and I think it's just such an amazing week to be in Washington, D.C. this week. I've been going to various hotels, and I tell you, I get jazzed every time to see these major African delegations and to see D.C. become all Africa this week. So it's been a very exciting week. But as you know, there are probably over 100 activities that are happening, and many of them were really kind of exclusive by invitation only. And so we wanted to do what we consistently do every couple of months, is to have an event connected to the summit that everyone in DC that wanted to come, obviously as big as the room is, could come. And so that's why we did this event today. We're now going to transition to the next panel. And I'm sorry for those people that stood up and wanted to ask a question and weren't able to, but you can follow this time and ask your questions. Now, we all know what the reality is. The reality is most people don't have a question. Most people actually really want to make a statement, which is okay. Just make your statements brief, and you can do that again at the end of the next panel. Could I ask you to hold on just 1 minute? Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Our next panel is going to be a panel of the young African leaders. Shh. Thank you. Our next panel is going to be a panel of the young African leaders, and people might be aware of President Obama's initiative, the Young African Leaders Initiative, and we're going to have representatives from them to speak to you right now. I would like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Bernadette Paulo, who has been in charge of the Africa Society. Let's wait a moment for there to be a transition with the delegates. Okay. Good to see you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. So sorry. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to give it a minute. I would like to introduce Bernadette Paulo, the head of the Africa Society, who has worked on African-related issues for the last several decades, and we are honored to have her here today. Nothing wrong with that, Bernadette. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. Would like everyone to take our seats. Their seats, please. Okay. Good morning, Congresswoman Bass and representatives of the African Diplomatic Corps, panelists. First of all, Congressmember Bass, thank you for convening this forum. We have an all-female panel, so you know that we're going to do a great job. Today, we all know that history is being made during the first ever U.S. Summit for African Heads of State. And all of you, I want you to join me in applauding President Obama, our African visitors, and these Yali folks who are here with us today, because Africa is in the House of Representatives. You have heard earlier today that the audience we have today constitutes members of the African Diplomatic Corps, think tanks, NGOs. And so I think that President Obama had it right when he had the Yali representatives come first, because the theme of the summit is investing in the future, and these young women are part of the future. And when you hear about their accomplishments, you'll understand why they were selected. We want to talk about issues of governments and development and youth leadership in Africa. Our panel is very short. We have 1 hour. So I would like your undivided attention, because these are 3 of 500 young professionals who are here with us today. Let's just take a minute to frame the issues before we go forward, so that you understand why youth is very important. 60% of the continent's population is under the age of 35. And the concern then is Africa's youth in sub-Saharan Africa, that under the ages of 15 to 24 years of age, there are 200 million young people. And we have Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, who just joined us. And although some of us aren't young people, we're very interested in youth, and she's been one of the champions of Africa. Will you give her a round of applause? And I would also like to welcome the brother, and I would say the mentor, of the late Congressman Donald Payne, who was a champion for Africa for many years. He's also the nephew of the current Congressman Donald Payne, Mr. William Payne. Young people in Africa hold great potentials as drivers for economic growth through participation in labor markets and also as consumers. A young population can be a resource that leads to innovation and supports governance and political reforms. We know that. However, a young youth population that is not gainfully employed can also be a liability, further undermining growth prospects and contributing to instability. And that is something we can't afford. Let's take a minute to tell you why President Obama's youth initiative then is so important. The Young African Leadership Initiative started in 2010, and it was designed to help provide training, educational opportunities, in some instances funding for innovation and entrepreneurship to America's and Africa's young leaders. And I'm going to introduce this panel, and they're going to talk to you about what they've experienced during the tenure here. But I want to take 1 minute to tell you what they'll experience when they go back. People are afraid that the summit and YALI and all these initiatives that we're seeing right here will be one-offs. But President Obama is making sure that that doesn't happen, because the number of 500 will be doubled to 1,000. So now, to talk about all of these issues and deepening our reach on the continent, we're going to turn to our distinguished panelists. And when you hear about their really great accomplishments, you'll understand why they were selected. Our first panelist is a parliamentarian. And we've talked a lot, I'm going to get this from you. We've talked a lot about Parliament, and we're in these hallowed halls right now. So I want to introduce to you first the Honorable Cheryl Vangadasamy. Cheryl?
That's me.
Over here, there you are. And next we have Chikalupi Kasaga and Yusuf Sharif. We're going to start with you, Cheryl. The first 3 minutes, we're going to hear about the backgrounds of these women, and then we're going to ask a few questions, and then I would like the audience to participate in the question and answer. Cheryl.
Thank you. Good morning, all, everyone. My name is Cheryl Vangadasamy. I come from the beautiful islands of Seychelles in the Indian Ocean. Yes, I am an elected member of Parliament. I am in my first mandate in office, 3 years in Parliament. Before that, I worked as a public servant, 6 years in the Department of Police Force, and then 2 years as a public prosecutor. I was engaged in the Constitutional Review Committee back home 2 years ago. I was the Speaker of the Seychelles National Youth Assembly. I am very engaged in youth activities. I have a daughter, and I love my country, and I believe in service. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Chikalupi Kasaga.
Thank you. My name is Chikalupi Kasaga, and I come from the land of Mount Kilimanjaro, Tanzania. And I'm a lawyer by profession, and I work with the Parliament of the United Republic of Tanzania. And before that, I was a magistrate. Though I worked for a very short period of time, I was a magistrate. And previous to that, I was interning at the International Project of Migration in Tanzania. And that's briefly about my background.
Chikalupi, you should be glad to know that you're in the city of lawyers. There are 60,000 lawyers in Washington, D.C., so you should feel very, well, you should feel at home. Would like to export some, so let us know if there's room in Tanzania. Our next panelist, Yushra Sharif. Yushra.
Yes, good morning. I'm Yusra Sharif, and I come from a big desert called Mauritania in West Africa. Oh, sorry, I think you can't hear me. Okay, so I have a background in economics, and I work at a local think tank in Mauritania. And what I do basically is to assist NGO in building their capacities and developing with them effective tools to monitor and evaluate public policies, mainly in education, health, women, and youth. That's what I do.
All right, let's... You've had this experience in the United States for 6 weeks. We've traveled around the United States and we've met with 10,000 young people. And when we ask them what they know about Africa, the first 3 words that come to mind, they say war, starving children, chaos. They don't know you. If you could talk to the young people in the United States and help educate them about the continent of Africa and your countries and your counterparts, what would you tell them? Start with you. Yes.
Okay. First of all, Africa is a beautiful, beautiful land with a lot of natural resources and a lot of beautiful land. And what I would, the only problem with Africa is that the Western countries have mostly been seeing Africa from an aid perspective, and now it's shifting toward a trade perspective. And hopefully this will come with educating people on opportunities in investment in Africa. And what I would suggest is to include more American peoples into exchange programs with African universities and schools.
As for me, I'll tell this American youth that as the African youth try to learn about the world, about the Europeans, so they should also learn about Africans, because now the world is very competitive. Now we are looking for the opportunities. When Africans learn about the world, we see how we're going to get these opportunities to use. If they don't learn, then I don't know how we're going to compete in the future, because our population is going to double in 2045 of the African youth.
From our parliamentarian.
What I would tell to the U.S. government, for an example, is as much as we have many programs for the African youths like this one, they should also have more exchange programs for the U.S. youths also to come and visit the African continent. As much as there are negative issues in Africa, but there are so many success stories in Africa, and there are so many beautiful stories in Africa, so that we can share also. There are best practices that we can learn from the U.S., but also there are very good practices that you can also learn from the African countries. And there is 500 of us here and 1,000 more to come. So this is what we are presenting. The 3 of us here and the 500 who came here, we are presenting and showing the potential and the beauty of Africa. Thank you.
As emerging leaders from the continent, can you all talk about what you view, and I know the time is short, but very quickly, the greatest successes, the challenges, the opportunities for youth development on the continent, and then you were supposed to be catalysts for change. That's why you were selected. What are you going to do about it? Okay, we're going to invert the order here. Chikulupi, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. I view the great success of the African continent lies to its people, the youth. And that's why President Obama thought it as an initiative to invest in the African next generation, the youth. Knowing that currently 60% of the youth of the continent is youth, and this population is going to double in the next 40, 50 years. So now investing in the youth, educating them, engaging them, empower them, these are all the success stories that the youth of Africa can do. Again, what I see the challenges of the youth in Africa is that they lack coordination. Many people are doing great things, like my friend in Seychelles, she's doing a great job. My friend from Mauritania, she's doing a great job. But we are coordinating. I don't know what she does, and they don't know what good stuff I do in Tanzania. So I think one of the things is coordination of among youth and the success stories. But again, unemployment is a huge, huge crisis. Now is a very huge crisis. And our 6 weeks that I have been here, we have been trying to find the solutions to our problems of the continent. Again, we have seen that education to youth is one of the important tools towards development. So these are the challenges that the African youth. But again, looking at the opportunities, we need to engage young people. That is what I've seen now, this program, help us to network with one another so that we can get engaged towards development.
Cheryl.
I think one of our greatest success stories for me is the fact that 500 of us, I got the opportunity to be amongst 500 young African people. Seychelles is a small island, and usually we're not part of the main continent. So we are a success story in ourselves. But I got the opportunity to learn about my other African countries here. And what a success story is how these young, beautiful young people is very inspiring. How to have a group of young people who believes in themselves, but who has persevered through many adversities and has managed to reach the top. And this is one of the success stories that I'm going to take back home. But also, one of our greatest challenges, like Chikulupi has been saying, is unemployment. How are we going to get all stakeholders on board, including our own government on the African continent, to really invest in our youths, in engaging our youths, and committing to the African Youth Charter, which we have most of the countries have signed and ratified, and also the African Youth Decade. I think for me, that's very important. And how, as a group, we're going to network together to really be able to come together with all stakeholders for solutions to really how to impact on the African youths in general. Thank you.
Yusra.
Okay. So as
you have to get close to him.
Okay. Thank you. So the main problem, one of the main problems we have in Africa with youth is the high rate of unemployment, and also the high employment in the informal sector. And what the tendency nowadays is that African youth is more increasingly interested in investing in Africa and to engage trade in a sustainable way. And they're really interested in rethinking Africa's development path for a greater socioeconomic development. So a way to do that is to have an increased and diverse quality education and high education and relevant education with skills development for the youth.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we are going to call from questions from the audience once again. If you've had the privilege of asking a question once, if you could allow other people to have an opportunity, that would be great. So you've been here, and you've traveled, and you've heard from our president and from our Secretary of State. You've been accorded a great deal of respect, and it's well-deserved. Can each of you discuss how your fellowship experience has changed your perspectives or confirmed your convictions about service and leadership, specifically pertaining to the roles each of you play in your own government and society?
Oh,
I see you want to start.
I'm a bit lost. I'm sorry. So the fellowship has highly impacted my perspective, especially on leadership. I used to mainly think that leadership was about having high academic grades and to be able to solve any complex issues with scientific methods. And now I know that the best form of leadership is obviously to be a servant leader and to educate and engage all the youth to lead and serve all community. This is how it most impacted mine.
That's interesting terminology, servant leader. I think that it's well put since we're in these hallowed halls of the House of Representatives. And it's something that we should all keep in mind, though, that members of Congress serve the people, as do administration officials, as do people like you, Cheryl. So let's hear what you have to say.
My 6 weeks program has taught me that being a strong young woman is not is not something wrong. In some culture, that being a woman and being strong is seen as not so good. But my 6 weeks has taught me being strong, and being a young woman and being a parliamentarian is a very good thing. And it has also taught me that being a politician, there can be and there must be politicians with good values. So that taught me something very interesting, and I will take that back home. And it also taught me to think globally, not only focus on Seychelles, what's happening in my country and in my community, but also what's happening regionally in my continent and for all the people in the world. Thank you.
To me, the experience itself has been life-changing. As an aspiring leader, I've learned that my greatest role to my country is to serve. The most challenges that we're having in Africa, they're not happening natural. As Mandela said, slavery and apartheid, they are not natural. People fought for them. Likewise, poverty is not natural. We need to fight for them. Most of the problems that we have need to be addressed by the leaders who are committed, and I am committed for my country. And again, as Obama said, as I am inspired by you, you should be inspired by one another, so that the huge network that I've made with my brothers and sisters that I've met in Yali are the good inspirations to our development of the continent.
Thank you. I want the gentlemen in this audience to take note, especially those of you from the continent of Africa. One of these women may be your president one day. So let me just say, it behooves you to pay attention to what they say. All right, let's start with our questions. Okay, yes, the lady over here in the yellow. I just want to say this by way of a preface. Okay. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has the first word, and she also is an attorney from Texas who has a long history of service, and she's a champion of Africa. Congresswoman, if you can please let her stand in front of you and use that microphone so she's heard.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. Can you see me from here? Good. Let me thank Bernadette very much for her wonderful leading of this panel. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And let me thank my friend and colleague who has done a dynamic job, the ranking member of the African Affairs Committee, Subcommittee on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, the Honorable Karen Bass. I want you just to give her a rousing applause. I don't know if you've stood up before. Why don't you just stand up? You need to shake it out. Why don't you just stand up? Give her a standing ovation. I don't know if she's in the room, but let it be known that she had a standing ovation. Karen, come on down. I'm like Oprah.
There she is.
Give Karen Bass, my friend, a standing ovation. Thank you all so very much, and I won't take the 3 hours that I had intended to speak to you this morning because there are people standing, and these very, very strong representatives of Yali, but really of the continent, which in actuality, for everyone to know, I'm so glad you're here because I think we will break the myth that Africa is not a nation, it is a continent, and a mighty big continent. And so I am glad to be able to offer these remarks this morning and to reinforce that leadership is not a bad thing, that being a servant leader is really an honor and a privilege to be able to serve, and therefore people would come to follow you. I'm also excited about the President's vision. And although he may not be within hearing, everywhere I go over these last couple of days, and I want you to know from the bottom of our heart how much members of Congress who've been advocating for Africa for a very long time are so grateful for this combined native son of both America and the continent, who we call the first African-American president of the United States of America with his lovely First Lady, had a vision that has now come to reality. And I believe that this is a giant step that is never to be turned around. And my commitment and my belief in my young years you know that I am their contemporary, of course, in my young years, that we will have the energy and partnership and commitment with the continent that will be beyond any other nation in the world. I promise you that. United States and Africa will be strong partners for a very long time. Yesterday, Karen and I participated in a participatory discussion at the trade under the auspices of the U.S. Trade Rep and at the World Bank, and it was very interesting to listen to a lot of the ministers on their vision of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And I just want to recount for you, this is not the African Growth and Opportunity Act, but it is legislation that we have committed through Karen's leadership and many others, Gregory Meeks and Congressman Smith, a number of others, Senator Coons, and most of all, the Congressional Black Caucus, 42 champions for Africa in the United States Congress, native sons and daughters, I might call them. They all claim the continent. But what I would say to you is that we're listening to you. We're listening to make the African Growth and Opportunity Act the kind of vehicle that can be viable for all of you. One shoe does not fit all. And I heard at that meeting that once we recognize your individual nations, there's no reason why bilaterals, individual agreements with individual nations based upon the common ground. Many of our states are engaged in doing contracts and relationships with our wonderful friends in Africa. I'm going to encourage the members to encourage their states to enter into contractual relationships. Texas, for example, with agriculture. And the kind of relationships that we can have on research and technology. In addition, I think it is important to note that there are small and medium-sized businesses on the continent. And so the multinationals should not be the only ones in the game. And I want the small and medium-sized businesses in the United States. If you are a Yali and you go home and start a business, why can't you do business here in the United States of America? That's what I think is very important. We want to make sure, of course, that we extend it in a long period of time. Thank you, Karen Bass, for the 15 years. And thank you so very much for knowing that a contract with these individual nations and the continent must be long enough for you to invest and for the business to invest and for there to be a return. And likewise, that if you build infrastructure, which I'm excited about, the water infrastructure, the underpinnings of energy, wind, solar, water, and the fossil fuels, nuclear and otherwise, you should not be precluded from any form of energy that electrifies this great continent, which is one of the legislations that we are talking about, making sure that everyone has light. And I think it should go from the inner cities of the famous cities that we all know to the rural areas that many of us enjoy going to, seeking our own personal roots. I want to just finish on a couple of words about governance. I am a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee. And I don't know if there's anybody here from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but I went to that area with a very spiritual and wonderful man. I'm going to take a moment to have his brother stand one more time. For my training, besides the time that I went to school in Africa, in Nigeria in particular, at the University of Nigeria at Lagos and Ibadan. A wonderful experience. I also attended the University of Ghana at Accra and Kumasi and spent some time there studying and understanding the political systems and the legal systems between, at that time, the common law system, British system, and the tribal system. But my real teeth in terms of what it means to put your flesh on the ground, your heart into it, came from a man that we will continue to honor. And I am so delighted that his brother is going to introduce to the world a recognition of my friend and colleague, an iconic member of the Congressional Black Caucus, Donald M. Payne, Sr., the Global Foundation continuing his legacy. Would you please stand? Councilmember Payne, his brother and mentor. Let him stand again. Maybe you didn't understand how much a leader Donald Payne was. So I thought it was an appropriate time as I close my remarks, for you look so good, I really want to stand here for another 3 hours. You really look good. And I will tell you how moved I am over this experience, and the numbers of members that are here are symbolic of all of the members who many had to scatter across America, but we stand for them, the members of the United States Congress, who have stayed back to be in these sessions. We stand for them. You have friends in the United States Congress. But it is important for me to say I am a member of the Homeland Security Committee. I deal with security issues. And the reason why I mentioned Congressman Payne is because we went into the Congo when the father Kabila was in. We went when he first came out, and we met in a bullet-riddled basement to talk to him about giving him anything that he wanted. As it relates to governance, there was a person, both of us from Judiciary, we said we'll write the Constitution. Not bossing people around, but offering our personal help, because that was at a moment when they were just emerging. We offered an array of governance issues. Democracy. I know it's tough. I'm not here speaking from on high. Democracy, equality, diversity, freedom, justice are not easy concepts. We didn't win that battle. That resulted in tragedy. But what I would say to you is some many years later, the intensity of members of Congress, particularly the Congressional Black Caucus, and those of us who have served on a number of these committees are as strong today as they were before. And you are a new Africa. But I encourage you, even in the newness of what you are, let us not turn the back, as we don't turn the back here in the United States, on some of our Achilles heels, some of the weak points that we face every day. So governance and democracy and the ability to have a contractual relationship that withstands the test of law is important. And turning a blind eye to the terrorist acts of Boko Haram is unacceptable. We must come together, continents and nations, and say enough is enough and never again. For if the concept of this great continent is those who speak the loudest and put a video out and show the worst, then we are equally at fault. As I listen to the news, things are getting better and better. But don't think that the local news is not talking about things that we have cast aside because you're a new Africa. But it is because we have to keep talking, and particularly African Americans, meaning Africans even who have come who are now citizens. We must not forget Africans who are in detention in our immigration system. And Africans must be as strong for immigration reform in the United States as any other group. We don't hear your voices as loud as it should be. Lastly, I chair the Congressional Children's Caucus. And every child around the world I have interest in. I had interest in Malala in Pakistan when she was shot just because she wanted to go to school. I have interest in girls and boys who want to go to school. And so I hope these are the results of someone's commitment to their education, their safety, and their security. I would ask you as you leave this conference, I don't know if there's any space that has been dedicated solely to children. I offer no fault. I just say we'll do it the next time. Children. Children who are from 0 to teen years. What are we doing to make sure that they are steered in a place so that a young man that I met in Tanzania who had to drop out, he came back later in life because his wife was able to pay for his education. Who knows where he would have been if he didn't have to get out in an earlier period of time. So you know I'm going to close by something that has been raising the ire of all of us mothers around the world. And that is, let us work together to bring our girls back home, wherever they may be. Yeah. Whatever girls may be missing or boys may be missing. Let's bring them home. Children are our most precious resource. Friendship is a bond that should never be broken, whether we agree or disagree with each other. I had a wonderful time at the Nigerian Heritage Celebration last evening, and we do not tell our story of how great our respective nations are. So I simply conclude by saying we are, in fact, our brothers and sisters' keeper. And we do much better when we work together to fight those obstacles and those definitions that do not fit me and do not fit you. I battled for the stereotypes of African Americans in the United States. We do it every day, but we win our victories, we turn people around, and we keep on marching. I am looking forward to marching step by step with my wonderful colleague who has been so dynamic, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Her leadership is a leadership that we are walking with, marching with, and I claim victory for all of us. May God bless all of your individual nations. May you have a wonderful time here, and may we be lifted where the eagles want us to do. Fly, fly, fly. God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
Okay. To the ladies on this panel, you see Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressmember Karen Bass. Take these memories back with you, because they are not shy about stating their views and fighting for them as well. Madam Chair, we reclaim the remainder of our time now. In addition to 5 minutes for questions. All right, let's start over here. I was the woman in the yellow.
Young African leaders, welcome to Washington. It's wonderful to have you here. I hope we hear a lot more from you. The first panel talked about capacity building on several occasions. I would like to hear from each one of you what you believe the capacity is that needs to be built. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take 3 questions at a time, and I don't want to be rude and interrupt you, but trust me when I say if your question's longer than a minute, we'll go to the next person. Next.
Good evening, and thank you to the distinguished panel for being here with us today. Africa has long been valued for her resources, it seems more than for her people. We're talking to 3 distinguished young people, future leaders of the African continent right now on this panel, in particular, the Honorable Ms. Vengadasamy from the Seychelles. It made me think of this. The search for, I guess, economic opportunity seems to have a cost oftentimes, whether it's in the human cost in DR Congo with the coltan mines, or whether it's in Seychelles with the sea level rise. To what degree are our young African leaders prepared to fight for a balance between fair trade and free trade, between food security and food sovereignty, between the environment and economics and the people versus resources? Thank you.
Next. Over here. Yes, sorry.
Thank you very much. Good morning. The program had
Your name, please. Your name?
Julia Lynn Walker, Africa and Diaspora Development Linkages.
Thank you.
The program had 3 key areas, one of which was civic engagement. To what extent was the program designed to expose you to the diversity of the America's population, and to what extent specifically did you engage with African Americans?
Okay. Cheryl, let's start with you.
My first answer to the capacity building. Africa now has 65% of the youth consist of the total population of Africa. Africa is the most youthful population right now, but 60 million of 60% of the unemployed are the youths, and 70% of the youths are living at $2 per day. I believe capacity building is in terms of not our government is investing in meeting the Millennium Development Goals for basic education. But I believe education in terms of capacity building, skills, vocational training, secondary and tertiary education is the key to really be investing in our youth for them to be able to gain skills and employment. My second can I answer the?
Yes, just very quickly.
Yes. And regarding the questions by the Mr. Host on this side, there should be a fine balance between issues like climate change and also sustainable development. Each country should be able to have this fine balance between development and also maintaining environmental friendly development to balance the climate change issue. For an example, we are concerned that the United States as of yet has not taken a position regarding climate change. And there should be a fine balance by our stakeholders, by the government, in investing more in agriculture, in terms of also other developments, and a fine balance between when companies in oil and mineral extracts, for an example, how the contracts are being negotiated, so that the contracts, when are negotiated, the benefits are not only seen by a few, but the benefits are really going down to the people that really needs it at the bottom of the ladder. Thank you.
Okay, Chikalupi.
With the capacity building, I believe that the African youth need to be equipped with skills of entrepreneurship. Most of the curriculum lacking entrepreneurship skills. In the end, people graduate without knowing how to start their own business, knowing that we have a big challenge of unemployment. So we need to encourage people to have entrepreneurship skills. But also women empowerment. Many women are just afraid in the culture and tradition in most of our countries. So we need to build the capacity for women, to build confidence, to give them financial discipline when they start their own business. Again, coming to the second question on free and fair trade and how youth can compete. I think now we need to have peace and security in our country. That's the first and foremost issue. Because if we need fair trade, we need to make sure that our countries are peaceful, but again, laws and policies that are friendly to encourage startup of businesses, and also that to have policies that offer business incentives for youth, because now like loans to youth who are starting business, it is the ratio of returning these loans is expensive, is way high. So again, we need to create these policies that create good environment that can give free and fair environment to start a business. Again, we're looking at the opportunities that AGOA offers to Africa. We look at the eco opportunities that are provided there. We see the US as our partner in business. Then we at youth, we can utilize the full potential that AGOA provide so that we can create free and fair environment for competition when it comes to business.
Okay, so very quickly, because everything has been said, I feel. Regarding capacity building, what I feel is very important is to help NGOs to better understanding public policies that directly affect them by training them and giving them skills for advocacy. And this is directly linked to the accountability of the government. And regarding the economic and fair trade, free trade, I believe that we should have a strong policy foundation to ensure that our leaders are accountable, and also the companies that are extracting our natural resources be held accountable for their action as well. Regarding the civic engagement, Chikulupi and I, we went to Howard University for 6 weeks, so we are very familiar now with the African American community issues and all of that. And we went to a lot of community centers to do volunteering activities, and we bonded over that.
All right, this is what we're going to do. I understand there's a fourth mic over there, and I missed you. So I'm going to take this young lady's question, and then we're going to have to move very quickly, one more round. So we're going to take 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to conclude with Congresswoman Bass, and so that we can be on time for our next panel. I know some of these panelists, and they're giving me very concerned looks over here from the right, so we have to be timely. Okay, let's go.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question, and congratulations to the young women. I want to know from you, how do you think Africa can make it easier for women and young people in general to enter into political leadership? There was a question about leadership deficit. How do we keep new blood coming in so that we don't get stuck in a rut as a nation, as a continent?
Very good question and very concise. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Ramatu Ahmed. I'm really concerned about our youth engaging in wars and other atrocities in Africa. And I would like to know from your perspective, the panelists, what are you doing as youth to discourage your fellow youth in participating in abuses of human beings and wars in our continent? And also, what are you doing on accountability and transparency, which is very crucial in terms of leadership and development in Africa?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Igodara. I'm a Nigerian gay man and a young Nigerian. I wanted to ask you questions. What are you doing to ensure that your continent are not forcing young leaders and young youth away from the continent because of the laws they are proposed, especially in Nigeria and socialism? And what are you doing in the parliament to ensure that the leaders in your countries are not enforcing these laws to drive away the potential youth of your continent? Thank you.
Okay. Right here. Yes.
My name is Ndidi. I'm of Nigerian and African-American descent. My question for the Yale Fellows is, what initiative do you have in place to transfer your skills to the youth on the ground in Africa? Because you guys have the skills, but there's still unemployment rate that is very high in Africa. So what can you do to transfer those skills to the youth on the ground?
Okay. That's it. We can't take any other questions, but I ask you to try to talk to these young women afterwards. Chikulupi, please start.
Thank you very much. With regard to the first question with women in politics, I think what women in politics, the environment...
Please, let's be quiet and listen to these answers, please. Thank you.
The environment in my country, let me say, for instance, in Tanzania, the environment is fair, the fact that we have democracy. Everyone can participate. But again, due to cultural constraints, women are not very confident to go. And understanding that the financial challenges that these women face is also a problem. Therefore, these women need capacity building, to be trained, to be prepared. That's why we still have quotas in our countries just to help and assist these women to enter into politics. And this has yielded success so far. We have women who entered through quota, but now they are doing a great job and they have been elected members. So we have seen the success of empowering women when it comes to politics. But again, when it comes to the second question, youth in wars, what I can say, youth in Africa, due to the challenges that they have, unemployment is high, so people finding what they can do. And looking at our education system, structure, make them not be able to employ themselves, find business to start up. Then all these challenges make this youth be easily influenced and manipulated by people who want to take advantage of them as a resource. So what I can do is still to do advocacy on how we can engage this youth who are a great resource, but yet they are left scattered without being coordinated.
So I will answer the question about accountability and transparency. So obviously, one of the main problems in Africa is that our governments and leaders are rarely held accountable for their actions, and they are not really expected to bring results. So the best way to ensure that they are is to advocate for transparency, but also have data to back up all of our actions, and to have accountability mechanism involving youth and women and NGOs.
I will try to wrap up all of the questions. My belief firmly is that, that there are lots of wisdom at the bottom. Sometimes we fail to believe that politics is about grassroots politics. We cannot effect change from the top. My personal belief is change comes from the bottom. And there's a great quote which I usually like. It says, never thought that a group of thoughtful and committed group of thoughtful, committed citizens cannot make change. Actually, they really can. And I believe in that. And for me, my part of engagement is that. My politics is like that. You have to get down to the people. You have to talk to the people. Sometimes it will take time for a mindset to change. But when you talk to people, you engage people. This is how you're really going to effect change. So this is my contribution when I go back to my country. I'm going to give more of myself to my people, spend more time talking to them, especially to the young woman who wants to participate in politics. It's not just about me getting there. It's about getting other young people, getting other young women to join me, to be there, and to make that change for themselves. And my role as a politician, as a parliamentarian, I have an oversight role in my government, and I have to take that role and responsibility seriously. So I ask questions in parliament, and I have to do that. Sometimes it comes with a lot of backlashes, but it has to be done. But I believe that as my colleague was asking the questions, we need to be able to hold our governments, even ourselves, even everybody else, accountable for our actions and take responsibility to really effect change. Thank you.
Excuse me one moment. There's one thing that all of us should say to you. African women have been the backbone of agriculture, and that they're at the forefront of advancing politically. In countries like Rwanda, where over 50% of the parliamentarians are women, and we have two heads of state who are women on the continent of Africa. We're still trying to reach that level in the United States, and I'm sure it will come. And so finally, for you as women, we need to commend you for being here and for what you've achieved. And so the final question I would like to pose to you is, what do you espouse for the integration of women in the political and economic spheres? And how do you see yourself being a part of that movement? Yusra.
Obviously, I think that we have already a foundation that is CODA, for example, of women in government. That's a good thing for us and can help us engage more politically. But I think it's very, very important that we build a relationship between older generation and younger generation of women and have mentoring mechanism that can empower young women to go into political or governmental positions.
Chikulupi.
I'd like to add saying that women in Africa are the ones who are largely involved in agriculture, and knowing that agriculture in Africa constitutes 1/3 of the GDP of the continent. So I'll urge that we put technology in agriculture and industrialize agriculture so that these women who are taking large part in agriculture benefit and take this agriculture as the form of business and for employment and food to feed the whole continent.
Like I was saying before, I want to tend to think globally, I mean regionally. Seychelles is ranked, after Rwanda, Seychelles is ranked 5th in the world for women representation in parliament. So I want to be able to engage my other sisters in Africa, how to be better, to empower them, how to better themselves, to really get engaged into politics in their own countries also. But also how to get my other young women in Seychelles to not see as politics as really, people view politics as a dirty, it's not a noble job. But that mindset has to be changed to get other young women to really participate in decision making. And also there's this fear of young women participating. We have our households to take care of, and there's this fear that it's a man's job. And for us, I think that's the mindset that needs to change, that women really can make a difference in politics. And I want to be able to help my other women, not only in my country, but also in the region, to really take politics seriously and really to take our, not only our leaders, but our community and everybody to task. Thank you.
I want to say something, a point of clarification. Mel Foote, who's the president of Constituency for Africa, is here, and he's also been an advocate for youth and their engagement, so I want to recognize him. And just a point of clarification before we close, Travis Adkins is on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and he's the staff director for the minority. And as a congressional staff person, I could tell you that staff people don't get a lot of credit, but he prepared all the moderators. He did an excellent job. He's a brilliant man. Let's give him a round of applause. As well as all Congress member Bass's team who are here, Allison and everyone who's here. Let's give them a round of applause. And finally, as a takeaway, I'm sure I'm speaking for all of the women here. This is intergenerational, and I've lived several decades beyond them, but we all like men. Not in front of us or in back of us, but alongside of us, where you belong. So thank you very much. We will be moving to the left, and another panel will be coming on. So thank you for your attention. Have a good afternoon.
See what I can do when they hear. There's a third yeah. Well, they're gonna. Yeah, they're already in the back. I'll see if I can grab you one. Thank you. What's up? That's okay. But did it go okay? Yeah. No. I'll grab those. I was thinking of going back there, but I thought. Yeah, they can just go back and sit. Thank you. Oh, no. Did you hear? Yeah. You can turn it around and see.
Yeah, I'm curious on why.
Yes. Oh, hey, how are you?
Fatima is
wait,
there.
okay.
With the hand the other side.
I am on the other side.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
When we are together, maybe we can have the tickets. Because he has the tickets. No, he's in Virginia.
We're going to start our next panel. Hello. Hello.
Well, thank you.
You know, turn them on and on. Hello, we're going to start.
This is my card, man. Oh, nice to meet you. Hey, how are you? Good to see you as well.
Let me give you
okay.
We're going to go ahead and get started. Could people take their seats?
Yeah.
Could everyone take your seat? How are you?
Good to see you. Low. Huh? It's very low, huh?
How are you?
It's very unfortunate. I don't have a card. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
To survive.
Hello, 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 hello. Could we ask you to take your seats for our third panel? Can we ask you to take your seats for our third panel? Can we ask you to take your seats for our third panel?
Okay, sit down, sit down.
How do I pronounce your last name?
Sit down.
Yeah, Asil. Asil. Okay. Now, introduce yourself first. Okay.
We're back.
Okay.
Okay.
We do. Oh.
Hello, we are going to start in just a few minutes.
Yeah, we introduce ourselves.
Can we just do that outside?
We're going to get everybody seated so we can begin our third panel.
Yeah.
So how extensive is the introduction?
Thank you.
So my name is this and...
Well, join me in welcoming our third panel, and I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Sharon Freeman from the All-American Small Business Exporters Association. We have a round of applause for our final panel of the day.
Shall I get started? Greetings, everybody. I see a lot of old friends here. I hope you can hear me well. What I will do is give some framing remarks. I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves a bit further to you. I know you have their bio information that you got at the desk. And then I'll pose a few questions to them and give you a chance to also ask questions. Okay, so we will get started. Where I would like to get started is at sort of an interesting place, and this relates to my own experience. 10 years ago, I wrote a book about successful African women enterprises. I did this for the African Development Bank. And interestingly, just recently, a few weeks ago, the government of Korea reached out to me to ask me to go to Korea today and update this book and present something on it. Now, what's interesting about this is a couple of things. Okay, one is I didn't know them, and my name wasn't on that book, and I don't even have a copy of that book. So how they knew that, I will never know. But that I tell you that for a reason, because the Asians are all over the Africa piece. So in updating this book, though, about opportunities for women enterprises in Africa, I challenged myself to figure out how, in fact, to update it. When we wrote it, we were thinking about the problems being endogenous, that is, internal, such as a lack of finance availability, a lack of technical assistance, and so forth. We weren't thinking so much about the pressures of the external world. That's what I had to look at in updating it. So now what I'm going to do in the balance of my 2 minutes is tell you about 11 amazing facts about Africa, and it's going to be sort of a Sherlock Holmes deal, because if you listen to these 11 amazing facts about Africa, you'll say, well, what is the problem? It's so fabulous. But then we're going to ask our panelists to fill in the rest of the story, okay? So I'm going to tell you about the great things, and I'm sure you've heard some of these already, and I'll tell you really quickly. Okay, first, Africa's economic growth is second only to Asia. I don't know how many people know that, but that's fantastic. Private capital flows to Africa has totaled more than $545 billion from 2003 to 2012, and that surpasses remittances and official aid. The third amazing fact is that Africa offers a higher rate of return on FDI than most emerging countries. Africa has also benefited from a surge in commodity prices, but that is not the reason why that's accountable for most of their growth. In fact, natural resources generated only 1/3 of Africa's GDP growth from 2000 to 2008. Believe it or not, the majority of Africa's growth is being driven by other sectors of the economy, including wholesale and retail trade, transportation, telecommunications, and manufacturing. Accelerated growth of the past 14 years owes a lot to improvements in the macroeconomic and political stability of the countries. And also this growth has been also rising, the incomes of households and discretionary spending has been rising. In fact, consumer spending is projected to reach $1.4 trillion by the year 2020. 40% of the continent's 1 billion people live in cities, a proportion that's roughly comparable to China's population and higher than India's. And by the year 2035, the continent is set to have the largest working age population of anywhere in the world. On current trends, manufacturing is set to create 8 million jobs by the year 2020, and more than 720 million Africans have mobile phones. Now, that's just some of the facts that I could share with you. But if you look at that, you would say, well, this is just fantastic. You know, why isn't everybody doing business in Africa? And what are some of the problems in Africa? And if you go back to what I said in the beginning, as to how I had to look at the situation for SMEs and women enterprises 10 years later, I saw what some of those problems are. But we're going to actually ask our panelists as well to talk about some of the challenges and how they're addressing it. So first, may I please ask that Her Excellency Fatima Asil, I'm going to ask her just to say a few words about herself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Fatima Haram Asil. I'm the Commissioner of Trade and Industry of the African Union. I went to school in the U.S. in Xavier University, and I have an MBA in finance. Thank you very much, and I look forward to having a fruitful exchange with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, sir.
Okay. My name is Mutai Maruping. I'm also a commissioner. She's my colleague, but of economic affairs in the African Union. I have the privilege and honor of serving in that capacity. Before that, I've been in a number of things. I used to be a teacher at the university, economics, statistics, business administration, administrator as a pro-vice chancellor, governor of the central bank, and founding member of an institute, Macroeconomic and Financial Management Institute of Eastern and Southern Africa, and ambassador and permanent representative in Geneva to WTO and to the United Nations and to the Swiss Confederation, and now Commissioner for Economic Affairs at the African Union Commission. I'm happy to be here and to have this privilege to share some thoughts with you, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot from your interactions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm called Richard Sezibera. I am the Secretary General of the East African Community, which is a community that brings together 5 countries, Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Before taking up this position, I was Minister of Health for Rwanda. And before that, I served here as ambassador, Rwanda's ambassador to the US. At the time, we were lobbying for AGOA, and I'm glad to see that a number of the members then are still here. Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressman Charles Rango, who I give credit to. Of course, Congresswoman Karen Bass is now here. Other colleagues, Congressman Payne, I'm glad to recognize his leadership then. He holds a very special place in my heart. Then other colleagues that I keep seeing, Mel Foot here, who was canvassing all of us, telling us it could be done, Bernadette Paolo, and Leonard of the Africa Society. It's good to see that those who keep an interest in Africa stay young. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So you see that we have a very distinguished panelists, and I'm sure you're going to have some very interesting questions for them. But before we invite you to pose questions, let me pose a few to our panelists as well. And let me start with Her Excellency. As I began to discuss in the beginning, there are so many fantastic things happening, and obviously you're here at an auspicious time in our American history where we've invited all of the presidents. That is unprecedented, and we have a lot of hope. So can you please share with us some thoughts about, in addition to some of the positive things that are happening, what are some of the challenges and what are some of the things that you will be addressing?
Well, thank you very much. I think that you have described Africa correctly. Africa is on the rise, the 7 fastest economies in the world, and so forth. So I don't think that I should repeat what you have said. But I think that for Africa to move forward, I think we need structural transformation. What I mean by sectoral transformation is the GDP growth that we have is not just enough. Thank you very much. I think that we need to go an extra mile, which is perhaps that, 7% is the target whereby we can see actually changes to our population. Now we're talking about an average of 5.6% of GDP growth. In addition to that, actually, transformation of raw material in the continent is also very, very critical. Because if you look at the majority of our export is raw material. We know that Africa is endowed with raw material. We know that we have the youthful population that she talked about, but we really need to transform our raw material in the continent. We need to create this value addition, and we want to make sure that our also people stay in our continent. I think that the people are our most useful asset if we use them correctly. So they need to have the proper skill, they need to have the vocational training, the higher education, whatever type of education it is, so to transform the raw material on the continent. Now, some of the challenges that we have, actually, everybody knows Africa is a big continent, 54 countries, but Africa is fragmented. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that Africa is now united. And in order for us to integrate it, in order for us to integrate Africa, our head of state and government adopted a framework called the Continental Free Trade Area so that we can have one integrated market, we can have a custom union later on, and then actually it will provide for African opportunity and also for the world opportunity that, bigger market. She talked about the consumer. She talked about the middle class. We talked about, the population. So I think that it will be something, an asset good for us. And this is something that we're very serious about it. We're working on it. And our head of state and government are monitoring that every 6 months to ensure that we're in target. And if there are any problem, they will address them. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. And I will just ask His Excellency, Mr. Marapong, to continue.
Thank you. First of all, we have to think, to remember that the overall objective is poverty eradication and development of the human being, the betterment of the lives of the people. That's what we are moving towards. That's the overarching goal. And what we need in Africa is not just growth. Growth is one of the paths towards that ultimate goal. We need development, which is a broader concept. We need a rapid, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development. And economic growth is one of the means towards that end. And to do that, my sister has already mentioned transformative and inclusive growth, which involves a number of things, such as development of infrastructure, such as development of agricultural production and agro-industry, such as accelerated industrialization, and the development of the services sector to support the whole thing. But in addition to that, private sector development, because it's the private sector that produces, it is the private sector that trades, is the private sector that employs quite a number of people. We can spend time on that. I will not go into integration that has already been mentioned, regional integration. But then through that, then at the end, it's trade. Trade derives from all of the above. Once you have diversified the economy, added value, there is something to trade, and then the trade will increase, accompanied by trade facilitation and other things that accompany lucrative growth. But, Madam Moderator, in order to do that, there has to be preconditions and co-requisites, conditions. So, in all these, Africa aspires that there should be gender equality and women empowerment that runs right across, and also youth engagement and empowerment. Africa is a young continent. We have seen young people here, the young leaders here. We have to pay attention to youth, but also, of course, sustainability considerations. Governance is very important, you know, transparency, accountability, competence, even efficiency. Prudent macroeconomic policies, which have been there up to now, should be continued and consolidated. Functional institutions, rule of law, human rights, and inclusive democracy, skillful management of diversity and inclusion. That will lead to peace, security, and stability, among other things. Thank you very much.
Okay, before I ask Mr. Sesbero to speak, I'm going to specifically ask you to underscore why regional integration is important. And let me give you one context I know very well. I lived in Hong Kong for 12 years. And when major manufacturers want to buy something from you, they need your guarantee. And that guarantee involves many countries. If you could not ship it, in this example, from Hong Kong in time, you would get it from Bangladesh or Taiwan. So these countries have to be connected with the proper infrastructure and the proper supply chain to be able to allow those sellers to make those promises. So from your point of view, can you amplify why integration is important and how is it happening among the 15 countries in your region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've put your finger on the challenge, which provides an opportunity for integration. Listen, my colleagues are right. Africa is rising. Growth 7% for many countries, even more. But I think Africa is a land of miracles because this growth is happening with very little energy. You know, energy consumption per capita on our continent is extremely low. In my own region, East Africa, we have to multiply the energy generated more than 10 times. So if we can imagine what would happen if we can invest and do this, we intend to do it in the next 15 years. If we'll do that, then what will the growth be like? And manufacturing, industry, and so on. So the opportunities are really boundless. Now, you cannot produce energy, you cannot industrialize, you cannot build infrastructure for only one country. It's got to be infrastructure that links all the countries. Many of our countries on the continent are landlocked, and therefore they need access to the sea. If you can build as many roads as you want for a landlocked country, but until the next country has the similar infrastructure, then that country will never develop. So integration is critical for us, and this is why we have invested very heavily in infrastructure in East Africa, over $43 billion financing for rail alone. We're investing in ports. We are investing in our harbors. We are doing interconnectors between countries. And we are trying to have a common industrialization strategy. Second is you can only grow if you create a market. Our countries are too small individually to satisfy the manufacturing needs of serious industrialists. Our countries are 40 million people, the big ones. Some are 1 million people. Once we come together as 5 countries in East Africa, as an example, you have 140 million, and that begins, then people can begin to sit up. If we can integrate and connect the whole of the African continent, is 1.2 billion people. A huge internal market, but we must remove barriers to trade. We must make sure that Africans can move within Africa, and make sure that goods can move freely within Africa, and that's what we are trying to do.
Okay, and as many of the African leaders and their trade ministers are attending the AGOA Forum, which I also attended, and there I heard a very interesting question, which was, where do we as Africans want to be in the supply chain? How do we want to fit in that? I thought that was a very interesting question, and so I will have a quick other round of questions I'm posing to you about what your views are about AGOA, about where you want to stand in the supply chain, and perhaps what are some of your views on some of the other trade preference agreements that are being contemplated and what impact you might think that would have on AGOA.
Thank you very much. I think that AGOA is, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that for the few days here, the Minister of Trade are discussing heavily AGOA, and then it will feature on the agenda tomorrow as well at the summit later. Actually, AGOA is a preference, and I think that the opportunities that AGOA provides is huge, but we have to understand that we did not realize the full potential of AGOA. AGOA is an instrument that is given to Africa, but also it creates employment in the US and in Africa, and I think that it could be, it has a bigger potential than what we're using. A lot of African countries are eligible to AGOA, however, they didn't take advantage of AGOA. So our countries are preparing a national response strategy to ensure that we benefit from AGOA going forward. The other thing that actually about, especially the authorization of AGOA, we want to make sure that the authorization is done on a timely fashion so that there is no trade disruption, because the current AGOA is going to expire in 2015. Therefore, we need the plea, and actually it's in our interest and also in the U.S. Interest businesses to ensure that AGOA is renewed on a timely fashion, and then in a predictable manner, seamless manner, and long enough to ensure that actually we can also take care of AGOA. We talked about regional integration. Regional integration is important. In order for us to have the regional integration, I think that we have to make sure regional integration actually is good for the whole world. So I think we have to make sure that whatever deal that we have, bilateral deals or multilateral deals, is not going to hinder our regional integration process. So we want to make sure that whatever that we're signing is going to contribute our regional integration process. We don't want to sign deals that perhaps could benefit a region or a country, but it will hinder the regional integration, the continental agenda overall, because at the end of the day, that's why we see how Africa is going to move. That's how we see that we're going to have a more competitive advantage, a huge market, integrated Africa. So we want to make sure that everything that we sign is really not going to jeopardize Africa. As far as value chain, I think it's very important for us to position ourselves in the value chain. We know that actually Africa only accounts for 3% of the global trade, and I think that Africa has to do more. In order for us to do that, again, integration is becoming, again, very important to make sure that we eliminate we implement trade facilitation, trade barrier, we ensure that we're integrated, we ensure that we have a bigger market, movement of goods, of people that actually my colleague over there said very much. And I think that when we get integrated, I think the value chain will be more in Africa, we can see it, and then we can be more competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Maraping. Your comments on AGOA?
The same. Oh, in fact, with your kind permission, I'll go back to the benefits of integration to say what we are really saying, bottom line, is economies of scale, We mean a more resilient economy. When they are all united, there will be more resilience to external shocks and efficient allocation of the factors of production. They will be able to move around a larger area. These are the benefits. Those synergies, that symbiosis can only bring benefits. On AGOA, I think there's been a wonderful program. Some countries have benefited very much, and a lot of employment was generated through this formulation, but it has to be updated, consolidated to bring even more benefit. And it will be more beneficial. More will come on board, more countries will come on board if it's accompanied by a program of increasing productive capacities. You have to produce in order to trade, and in order to do that, you have to build capacity in various forms. There are various things that can be done to increase those productive capacities. To me, that's the bottom line. Then we will diversify, then we will go into value addition, and a great advantage of AGOA will be taken.
And
Thank
Mr. Cesabero, thank you very much, sir.
Well, I fully concur with what is being said. Let me just say two quick things. One is that our private sector tells us that in the next iteration of AGOA, we need to also deal with the issues that prevent them from gaining market access to the US. So discussions around phytosanitary issues and barriers to trade for the US market, I think, is important. Second, I want to say that we ourselves are working hard to remove those barriers to trade within the continent, which will help American business in the context of AGOA. So removing, a number of our countries have taken the lead. Mauritius, Rwanda, and others have removed visa requirements for Africans traveling within Africa. That can only help businesses. We've been involved in reforms over time that are making doing business across our many regions in our continent easier. And so I think if we can work together to address some of those issues, then the next iteration of AGOA will be extremely important for us.
Thank you very much. We were just getting ready to go into the question and answer session, but I have noticed that the Minority Leader, Ms. Nancy Pelosi, has arrived, and I would like to please acknowledge her presence and also give her an opportunity to say a few words.
Hello? Oh. Excuse me. That's right, we should stand up. Thank you, thank you. Our leader tells you to sit down, I tell you to stand up. And, and I did that because I think that she should be appropriately acknowledged. Leader Pelosi is the Democratic leader of the House. Former Speaker, she's taking a break from being Speaker right now, but will be Speaker again very soon. And has been kind enough to come and to greet us in our third panel. But I just wanted to take a second and introduce her properly because she is one of the most powerful women in the United States. Leader Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Karen Bass, and thank you for your leadership to bring us all together in your role as the top Democrat on the subcommittee on Africa. Effective from the start, Karen came as the Speaker of the California General Assembly, came to Washington, rose to the heights of ranking on this committee, hopefully sometime soon, the chairman of it. But the fact is that we have bipartisan support for the reauthorization of AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. We want to strengthen it as we reauthorize it. We support our president in a very strong bipartisan way on Power Africa. Electrifying the continent is probably the best thing we can do for education, for economic growth, and the rest. They're all connected. I want to join Karen and my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, in welcoming you all to the Capitol for this important meeting. And I want to acknowledge our distinguished panel for the work that the presentation that they are making, and others that went before them this morning, and everyone participating. We've all been to a number of events already and so far. But I also want to acknowledge our former colleague, the late Donald Payne, who was a champion on issues. Perhaps it was acknowledged earlier, but I want to further acknowledge his brother, William Payne, who's with us now, and who has the Donald Payne Sr. Global Foundation. I've traveled to Africa with Donald Payne in years past and seen the esteem in which he is held there. We know the esteem that he's held here. But his reach was global. Right after his passing, we went to the great big St. Patrick's Day dinner, the Ireland America U.S. Fund dinner, and whose picture did they have as big as a whole wall but Donald Payne? So his peacemaking is something that is well known. His love of Africa I saw recognized in Liberia when we went there with him for them to dedicate a library at the AME college there. But anyway, just to say that these connections are there. I want to make a couple points in closing. First of all, I want to thank all of our visitors from Africa for coming, for your leadership. Thank you for the, shall we say, the urging of more women to participate. I met with some of the presidents. One of the prime ministers last night told me that his country, they have 30% women in the parliament. I want you all to join us in something we have. When women succeed, America succeeds. Yes. Well, when women succeed, Africa succeeds. And I know that has been some of the talk about empowerment of women has been part of your theme, but let me just say, let us leave here with the idea that if we want all of our economies to succeed, we should engage seriously in womanomics. Womanomics. That we have a situation where we know that to unleash the power of women, we have to have education, and we have to have affordable quality childcare so women can leave home with peace of mind. We have to have sick leave. We have to pay equal pay for equal work. We have to do all of those things. That is our agenda, but it's a global one. And some of you have spoken to me in the hall and in other venues about violence against women. We have it in our country. It is an issue that we have to deal with. But respect for women is central to the success of all of our countries. So again, it's a broader agenda, but affected very much by the role of women. I couldn't be more excited. And I'll just say, when I say thank you, I want to make this further point. When I was very young and in school, John F. Kennedy was president of the United States. The end of colonialism and imperialism was coming. That was coming to an end in Africa. The United States was vying for the friendship of African countries because of the Soviet Union vying at the same time. And one of the things that happened that is connected is that I believe that because of the great leadership we had in our country in the civil rights movement, but also because it was clear to America that if we were going to invite the respect, have the respect of African nations, we had to respect African Americans in our own country. And so you have helped us be true to who we are as a country, liberty and justice for all, by your empowerment there. We have a lot to learn from you. Let's listen to each other on this trip, on this visit, and let's this be just one of many comings together over time. I want to salute our president for taking the lead in putting it together. I want to thank the Democratic and Republican leadership of the committees of jurisdiction for their share of hospitality. I want to thank Karen Bass for her exceptional leadership in this regard. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Leader Pelosi. I'd also like to ask you to join me in welcoming another special guest we have here, my colleague from Los Angeles, Representative Brad Sherman.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. For 14 years, I've served on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Financial Services Committee, or to put it in the context of this conference, the OPIC Committee and the Exim Bank Committee. I look forward to working with everyone in this room, but especially our leader and our great leader on the Africa Subcommittee, Karen Bass, for to make sure that those two organizations are reauthorized this fall, and then, of course, AGOA well before September of next year. So I look forward to learning especially what American businesses can do in Africa, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Let me turn us back to our panel.
Well, that was so exciting. It's hard to get back to business, but now it's your turn. Please come to the mic, and we want you to ask just one question, please, and please identify yourself by name and your affiliation. One question.
Pauline Muchina from Kenya, Future African Leaders Project. I live here and work here. My question is, we know that when you have a common currency in a region, you have a lot of strength. What steps is African Union taking to make sure that that happens? And what steps also is African Union taking to ensure that women of Africa have access to economic power? Because talking about it is not going to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we're going to take 3 at one time, and in fact, they can be comments or questions. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation.
Karen. I'm Jordy Hannum with...
I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Jordy Hannum, the United Nations Foundation. Our organization works a lot on peacekeeping operations, and what we've seen is a lot of studies that have shown is the significant economic growth, the significant GDP growth in places where peacekeeping operations, UN and AU peacekeeping operations operate. And I'm just interested from any of the panelists who can kind of testify to their experience about kind of the economic growth that happens versus those places that don't have it. Thank you.
Okay, one last one over here to the right before we ask them to respond.
Great. I'm Barbara Spann from Western Union. Our locally owned and operated agents on the continent proudly employ more than 100,000 Africans, hopefully a step in the right direction to address the issue of youth unemployment. So my question today is about employment and the mobility of Africans seeking work around Africa. I'm the vice chairman of the World Economic Forum, a global council on migration. And we have a coalition of companies who are looking to increase their investment in countries on the continent. And many of these companies in diverse sectors, IT, hospitality, financial services, say that they make the decision not to invest in countries in Africa quite often because of the difficulty in getting enough African workers to be able to be employed in their particular area. They have trouble getting the mobility of those workers from nearby countries to have a large enough workforce. So some of good policy changes have occurred in the EAC, certainly, but that's just a start. And there's a huge gap still between new policy and implementation. So what advice would you give to businesses so we can accelerate the improvement in visa policy and the mobility of workers? Thank you.
Okay, 3 questions and 3 panelists. So may I start to the left then?
Okay,
Pick a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I will talk about especially the mobility and perhaps a little bit on the women in and economic powers. As far as mobility, I think that this is a correct question. I think that when we talk about integration, we have to talk about movement of goods and also movement of people. That's why actually our head of state and government decided to have this continental free trade area. by 2017. But actually, my colleague here said Mauritius, Rwanda gave example. Now there is no more visa. Last time when we went to the World Economic Forum, there is a statement of intent for countries to sign and say that let's implement through movement of people, through movement of business people, and so forth. So I think that this is work in progress. Our leaders are very, very serious about it. We discussed, some of our leaders were in the World Economic Forum. They signed that intent, and I think that this is something that we need to have in order for us to have this free movement of people and services. Actually, perhaps my colleague will talk about especially EAC, which is an example, and also, the tripartite, the free trade area between the COMESA region, which is, the southern region, the eastern region, and EAC. They're establishing this free trade area, and I think that movement of goods and people is important because movement cannot move without people. I think the currency is the commissioner in charge of the currency is there, so he will respond to all the questions. As far as the women in Africa, I think that I need to say something. We're very conscious about, I think, empowering a woman, and I'm quoting actually some of it's the right thing to do. Our chairperson is a woman, President Dr. Dlamini Zuma, and she's very, very serious about women. As a matter of fact, the Commission, the African Union Commission, is composed of 5 women and 5 men, so it's a parity. And actually what she's trying to do is ensuring that in all the departments, there is that women empowerment. There is also, what type of function they're using and so forth, because they constitute more than 50% of our population. And if we're serious about development of Africa, I think that we cannot ignore that women. Even on the peacekeeping, I think that we have special envoy that deal with the women, with violence, with the children, soldier, and so forth. So I think that women are all up front. And actually, my chairperson always said, that Dr. Dlamini Zuma, that when we empower women, we make sure that we have clean water, we make sure that the education is there, we make sure that everything is there because we women understand issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Your Excellency, Mr. Maraping.
Yeah, after that eloquent response. On currency to facilitate trade and other activity, there is something going on. First of all, to try to harmonize payment systems, but they are also in the offing to move towards African central banks. In fact, we are meeting governors of central banks this month in Malabo, I think on the 28th or something, to try to move forward on this front. There is also an idea of having a virtual Pan-African stock exchange to make sure that we move the funds from those who have them and don't have immediate use for them to those who are enterprising and would like to put those funds to productive activities. Recently, in one of the ministerial meetings, the statutes of the African Monetary Fund have been adopted. So the next step, of course, is ratification so that we move towards this goal. So there is something going on. It may be at snail's pace, but it's a movement forward all the same. On women, there was a solemn declaration last year during the 50th anniversary of the African Union. World Economic Forum annually produces a report on closing gender gap. And some of the African countries are even doing better than Asian, European, I'm sorry, and also North American developed countries, actually. So there is movement there, and we are pushing for that. And I have to tell you, those men who are doubtful there, that I'm very happy and enjoying having a woman as my boss, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I want to tell you it's harmless. On the contrary, it's beneficial. So there is movement in this, and you will find this in our new frameworks. If you look at the Common African Position on post-2015 development agenda, you will find that gender issues have been very adequately covered. And they will be adequately covered on Agenda 2063, which is the framework for the next 50 years on the African continent. On peace and security, again, it's dealt a lot in our frameworks, And the path is by way of prevention. By way of prevention, rather than extinguishing fires, let's prevent fires. Mm-hmm. Then our fire brigades can rest a little bit. So we try to break this egg and hen of lack of progress, then conflict. Because there is no development, there is conflict. Because there is conflict, there is no development. Mm. We got to break that egg and hen cycle somewhere. Okay. I was going to talk about Great Lakes, Horn of Africa, Sahel, which is an idea of approaching peace and security from development point of view. I will leave the employment one to my colleague here.
Your Excellency, Mr. Cesbero, thank you.
Just two quick points on single currency as a building block of the African Union. When the East African community signed the Monetary Union Protocol in 2013, our heads of state signed on to it. And that protocol has a 10-year roadmap to a single currency. So we intend to have a single currency by 2024. And in the meantime, we're integrating our financial and fiscal policies. On gender, I come from a country that has 64% of the members of parliament as females. Yes, in Rwanda, 64. In the region, 3 members of our speakers, 3 of our speakers out of 6 are female. And so it is happening on our continent. I would like to assure you of that. On labor mobility, very briefly, I just have to agree. We are, as part of the discussions with our colleagues in SADC and COMESA, we are also negotiating a free movement of business persons protocol, and I hope we can reach agreement on it. It's a challenge, but we are working on it.
Thank you. We will entertain brief remarks or questions from the left first, please.
Mushir Robinson. I'm doing 3 power plants, 1,000 megawatts each, one in Ethiopia, one in Senegal, and one in Ghana. Big problem that we need AU help with is to have, following up Karen's earlier point, is a credit facility that's non-sovereign guarantee. Power should not have to be guaranteed with a sovereign credit. The U.S. government, through our OPIC and EXIM facilities, totally non-competitive, and require those guarantees. The guarantees should be reserved for health care, education, water. So the question really is, how quickly can you move to create, in partnership with the IMF, World Bank, and various private sector players, a credit facility, just as we've had to use in the United States in municipal finance, having third-party guarantees?
Thank you. We'll take particular note of that question. Let me ask from the right over here, please, your name and affiliation as well.
My name is Sega Jan, and I am a Gambian living in Kentucky. I am also part of the Committee for the Restoration of Democracy in the Gambia. The facilitator today, Dr. Sharon Freeman, talked about all the wonderful things, the opportunities, and the fact that Africa is the new frontier, which we all agree. And then she asked, why with all these opportunities and these wonderful things that are going on, what is going wrong? Why is it not translating perhaps to the little person in the farm, in the village? And when that question was asked, all the panelists, in fact, began to give a number of very credible reasons why those things perhaps are not translating exactly on the ground. Now, I want to add one more thing to it and conclude by posing a question. Here is a statement that was made by somebody who is very wise. They said that no country can rise higher than its women. I also want to add to that statement that no country or continent can rise higher than its respect of human rights and the fundamental God-given rights of the people. In fact, I present that sustainable socio-economic growth and development can only occur in green pastures that are rife and watered by a system based on respect of the fundamental and God-given rights of the people residing in those pastures, who will then flourish as a result, and in turn be free to contribute to their talents to that flourishing country. I want to give you an example. I am from the Gambia, one of the smallest, and I'm going to round up, I know. One of the smallest countries, or the smallest country in Africa. We have a dictatorship that Yaya Jammeh, who has his foot on the neck of the people. An example, a young lady here, Jukosise, has her brother withdrew his 401k to go back to Gambia to invest, him and his friend, their lifelong savings, and they were imprisoned for the past year, leaving young children here. We as young people want to go back and contribute to our countries, but because of lack of laws, because of dictatorship, because of a moratorium on free speech, we cannot contribute our talents. We say that you should, in fact, look at how those economic advancements should be looked at with democratic and human rights.
Thank you very much. We definitely get your point. Before we go on, and I do want to let you know that the people in line will have an opportunity to ask a question or make a brief statement. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce my colleague, Gregory Meeks from New York. Greg has been involved in African issues for a very long time. And tomorrow, as part of the summit, we'll be hosting an event targeting U.S. business and African businesses. And the two of us work together as co-chairs on African issues in the Congressional Black Caucus. Gregory Meeks.
Good afternoon. It is, Madam Leader, good to see you. I'm delighted to be here today. And as I walked in and listened to some of the questions and knowing the interest that's been taking place all week, it is tremendous to see you here. And I would be remiss if I didn't start off by, as I see Mr. Payne here, the first thought that came to my mind, and when I met with some ministers yesterday, I said that I can see Donald Payne Sr. looking down and smiling on the summit that's taking place here in Washington, D.C. Many of you know that Donald Payne was the longtime either chairman or ranking member of the Africa Subcommittee. So I can also see Donald Payne smiling and very proud about the job that Karen Bass is doing as the ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Africa Subcommittee, because Karen has been a leader. Let me tell you, number one, because that's what I wanted to let you know who was in here, that Karen is a historic figure in and of herself. She is the first African-American woman to be the Speaker of the legislature for California. She was the Speaker of the House in California, so she's no Johnny-come-lately. She is a history maker in and of herself. And she's come to Congress with Africa in her heart. We've had conversation after conversation, and all she told me when she came in is that I've been involved in Africa, and this is what I've been meant to do, and I want to make sure that I do everything in my power to show that Africa and the United States are connected, and we make sure that at every segment of society, whether it be civil, whether it be economics, whether it be democratic, that we interconnect with those of us in the House of Representatives. And this conference and her dedication has shown exactly that. And Karen, I thank you for your hard work. And so, 14 years ago when we did AGOA, this was supposed to happen more and more. But it took us 14 years to get to where we are now. And you look back and there's been significant progress that we've made. I see Brother Mel Foote here, who has been laying in the vineyard doing Africa since I know I've been here in Washington long beforehand. I want to appreciate and thank you. But now this has come together, and we've got to make sure that we stay together. And one of the things that, has took place the Friday, last act that was done. And with Karen's assistance and a number of others, especially the leader of the Democratic House, Nancy Pelosi, we were able to pass a resolution. A resolution talking about the House and our connection to Africa. And I just wanted to run through a quick number of those passages because I think that it gives an indication of where we need to head and what we need to do and how this Congress. So the resolution I was happy to author, happy to have every Karen Bass co-sponsored and every member of the Congressional Black Caucus a co-sponsor of, basically says, one, that the United States Congress will stand beside Africa in promoting peace and prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic, and it is in the national interest of the United States to support the development of Africa and its prosperous and democratic continent. Two, the resolution expresses the acknowledgement of the great opportunities for mutually beneficial trade and investments between the United States and Africa, and we are committed to forging strong ties to promote economic growth, poverty reduction, democracy, the rule of law, and stability. And such opportunities include the renewal of AGOA, the electrification of Africa, and also empowering the next generation of African leaders, including its youth and women, who have been a great source of inspiration and development. And finally, the resolution recognizes the significant progress and hope that modern Africa represents today in global affairs and for the future. Its booming demographics, its dynamic youth, and its vast resources. Africa is the hope for the future, not just for Africans, but for the entire world. Amen. And so, it's with great pleasure that we welcome the African heads of states, the ministers, and the CEOs in Washington, D.C. this week, for this is truly Africa Week in the United States. And I look forward to making sure that this is not just a week, because the key is what happens after the summit is over. The key is what dialogue and what conversations and what deals and what relationships that the United States has after the summit. And that's where all of you become tremendously important. Staying connected with us, continuing to have your voices heard, and keeping us in government to make sure that we are latching on with those on the continent. There's great opportunities. The progress that Africa has made and the potential that now lies between our two great, the continent of Africa and all of the 53 nations of Africa, because let me end on this. Sometimes we forget. We talk about Africa as if Africa is a country. Africa is a continent with many countries. And we've got to recognize that fact, and that there are different countries with different characteristics and different responsibilities. But I close to say that we, Karen and I, and the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, since many of us cannot say directly which country we are from, we have decided as members of the Congressional Black Caucus that we're going to adopt the entire continent.
We love that.
So thank you for being here. Look forward to working with you. And thanks to my sister and my colleague, Karen Bass, the ranking member, soon to be chair of the African Subcommittee. We appreciate you so very much. Thank you very much.
Very good. Oh, it was good. Thank you.
Okay, so we will carry on. We have 2 questions before us. We didn't forget. One was about credit availability for power plants. The other concerned governance. And now we'll have one more from the middle. Please identify yourself and your affiliation.
Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Nwachu. I'm a member of the Diaspora African Women's Network based here in D.C. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate this forum. I just wanted to ask, as a member of the diaspora, I'm a Nigerian American, how is the African Union encouraging the individual member states to also encourage the efforts of small business people in their individual countries to connect with small business owners in the States? There are many of my colleagues who are budding entrepreneurs and would want to enter into partnerships with small business owners in particular on the continent. So if you could speak to any initiatives that are in the works or in place, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, I don't think we have to comment on, everybody doesn't have to answer every question, so why don't you choose which question you would like to address? We have the question of power and credit availability for power. And we have the issue of the diaspora and encouraging efforts to encourage firm-to-firm linkages, and the question of governance. So why don't we start with you then on the issue of diaspora creating linkages?
Thank you very much. I think this is a good question. I think that if you look at the history of the World Economic Forum, now you will see more and more leader businesses coming at the World Economic Forum, linking. And actually, you can see also that our government, our head of state, working with the small businesses, our private sector, working with them to ensure that there is a conducive environment, to ensure that, you know, they facilitate so that, you know, there is a partnership with the small and medium enterprises. I think that we all realize that our potential is small and medium enterprises. So we really have to look at that. My colleague here in his department, he has a private sector area which actually deal with all these issues. In addition to that, for the Continental Free Trade Area, we're going to have a business council where we're going to have leaders, our businesses, outside world to discuss how do we exchange. We also have an investment monitoring platform which we're creating, and basically it's just an online system that needs to be updated. Basically, any investor from the US will say, for example, I want to invest in Africa, for example, in leather or, you know, any product, or I want to invest in any specific country, and then you can get all the inline information. The companies will also express interest to say that we want to network with you know, any partner that is interested. So we're also working on this monitoring investment platform, which once it's completed for all the countries, we want the regional economic communities to make sure that, you know, they update the information, because a database is only as good as it's updated. I want to comment a little bit. I think that the Gambian situation is very specific, but I just want to say that the African Union, we do have an African governance architecture that is in place. We also have an African peer review mechanism. For us now in Africa, I think you agree with me that election now, democratic election are the norm, but not an exception. I think this is a specific question, so we're not going to get in that, but we understand and we agree that respect for rule of law, transparency, accountability, improvement is important. And I think that if we want to be serious about development, I think that we have to make sure that this is in place. I think about the credit facility, perhaps my colleague is under his area, so I don't want to say anything about it. Thank you very much.
Before we move on, may I also say that in terms of the U.S., perhaps you would consider putting pressure on us to have us utilize our resources to outreach to the diaspora here in order for you to connect with them.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Would you like to comment specifically on the credit?
On credit, really, it would be difficult to find a non-sovereign, because you cited World Bank Group. There are many institutions within the World Bank. It's the World Bank Group, you know, particularly MEGA, I'm sorry, and IFC that deals with the private sector. But the World Bank Group itself is intergovernmental. IMF is intergovernmental. African Development Bank is intergovernmental. They are trying to work on innovative ways of financing infrastructure, including energy generation. But it is an intergovernmental undertaking. For me, I see that the state and the private sector have to work together. We are no more going to strict socialism or state capitalism, but to what we call developmental state, the state that clears the ground for the private sector to perform well. And that teamwork, that synergy between developmental state and the private sector should be able to create some miracles on the development front. Because even if you sell bonds, developmental bonds, as Ethiopia is doing with the Millennium Dam, the bonds are still issued by the government. They are still guaranteed by the government. It's still sold to the diaspora, but guaranteed, and the yields will come from the government. So private sector and the state have to work together. Developmental state, private sector. I won't go in Gambia, on the Gambian, let me just say that if you read this document, which is the roadmap for post-2015 development agenda, Common African, you will find that democracy and the question of women are very adequately. This is an undertaking that has been approved by the African Union, by acclamation, by the way. It was not debated. There was no vote. It was adopted by acclamation. And it's based on the views of the stakeholders. It has been a bottom-up process rather than top-down. So there is commitment there. I think you said specifically that, so I will not talk about SME, small, medium enterprises, which we know are very good employment generators, actually, and should be encouraged, but I will leave that to my fellow panelists.
Could I just mention the name of this? I don't know if you have it. It's called the Common African Position, CAP for short. Is this available on the web?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a Common African Position.
On post-2050.
The rest of the title is on post-2015 Development Agenda, okay? Sir, would you like to add a comment? Okay, so in that case, we're going to go to the middle.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Sewakirianga. I'm from Uganda, from the Uganda National NGO Forum, but I also chair the East African Civil Society Forum, so I'm honored to see Dr. Sezibera here. My question is a very quick one, and it's about the constraints that are really at the heart of what is happening for the private sector. There are three things that need to be unlocked. One of them is the whole question of how we use local content, especially in minerals and other industries, because I think while we are here, it's very easy to speak about all the other things and forget to speak about local content. So I would like just to hear what is the take of the commissioners, but also of Honorable Sezibera
Can I
on
just
local
ask
content.
you to clarify what you mean by that? You said use local content.
The issue about local content means that when you go to industries like oil and these others, the expertise is mostly outside Africa.
Oh, I see.
So in a sense, you may find a crowding out
Yeah.
of the African expertise, and nothing is built, but a lot is taken out. The other thing is the whole question of counterfeit. That there are so many counterfeits, so many fake goods, let me call it that are actually getting onto the market. And actually, African industrialists are finding it so hard to beat the counterfeits. And our laws are so poor when it comes to counterfeits. And then the last one is the whole question of subsidies. Many of the African countries have no laws on subsidies. So in a sense, if you want a subsidy, you have to walk to the state house of any country to be able to get a subsidy. But I don't know if there are issues, there is something happening at the level of the AU to deal with these issues. But these are critical points that are important for unlocking any economic priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. A question on the right side, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Dinka Fitzgerald. I'm Cameroonian. I'm a practicing medical doctor and advocate for global development and entrepreneurship. I'm getting into it. So my question goes to the panel. Generally, we've been hearing about the growth in Africa being second to Asia and all that, but from personal studies I did, especially in Cameroon, it's more of a superficial thing, because it doesn't necessarily match the increase in cash flow. I mean, when we look at the statistics, it doesn't necessarily match the increase in cash flow or job creation. And we see that, like, those entrepreneurs, I mean, the business people who are, I mean, who are developing, they don't, like, increase salaries for those working with them. So it ends up, just the people up there are getting richer, and those down there are still having the same problem. My question goes thus: don't you think we have to, like, work on the mindset of people in leadership positions, work on the mindset, and with regards to things like greed, before we can make any real development in Africa? Thank you.
So let me repeat those, and then we'll address them. One had to do with counterfeit. The second was local content. The third was about subsidies. And the fourth, his question really is about economic growth without economic transformation. Why don't we start with you?
On the issue of counterfeits, it is a problem. All countries have invested in fighting counterfeit. There are capacity challenges, and which is why this is one area in which we believe countries have to cooperate. And in East Africa, we have we're developing a regional anti-counterfeit law that will bind all our countries, and then working with the countries and other partners to build capacity to actually address these issues. Now, the question of growth, yes, our countries are growing. Poverty levels are actually falling. If you look across Africa, poverty levels are falling. In some countries, they are not falling fast enough. That's correct. But in others, for example, Rwanda has pulled out 1 million people out of poverty over the last 5 years, which is the fastest such happening in history. So it is true that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that the growth goes with equity. But actually the figures show that absolute poverty levels are falling. In terms of greed and so on, I fully agree. But this is corruption is a question that we must deal with country by country. I only agree that you cannot invest in corrupt leadership and expect good governance. It doesn't work. But that's our burden as Africans. We must make sure that where there is such corruption, we deal with it.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on the local content issue? The question is, are there plans afoot to require more local content?
Yeah, well, from the African Union's point of view, yes, the private sector development division also emphasizes what is called inclusive business. In inclusive business, it's that type of business that includes the people at the bottom of the pile or of the pyramid in the productions, either in providing inputs, in the process of inputs, or in producing that product, or in the distribution phase. You include people at the bottom of the pyramid. That is an attempt to make sure. For instance, there is one brewery I know in Ethiopia that is helping peasants to produce better inputs. I think they use rye or something. And they are assured of the market that they will buy that to produce that. So you see why peasants are included at the input phase. And I'm sure they are also included in the distribution phase as well. So if we move in that direction, I think we will be moving at greater speed towards local content. But I just agree that it's a good thing to include local content in production. I think that's it.
Okay, gentleman to the left.
Can I say something? Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Don Reed. I'm with the Office of Inspector General, And here's a question for the panel. Is corruption viewed as a serious problem in Africa, and particularly with respect to the growth of economic development and human development? And if it's viewed as a problem, what are your thoughts on addressing it?
Okay, ma'am in the middle.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Melinda St. Louis. I work for Public Citizen. And my question relates in the conversation about promoting investment and sustainable development in Africa. My question relates specifically to the changing paradigms related to international investment agreements and treaties. As we've seen an explosion of cases that have come under investment protection treaties using extreme rights and the controversial investor-state dispute settlement mechanism that has challenged environmental laws, public interest laws, such as South Africa's black empowerment law, Egypt's minimum wage standards, demanding millions or billions of dollars in taxpayer compensation outside of domestic courts. And similarly, we've seen that the evidence linking these treaties to increased foreign direct investment has not borne out in the data. We've seen countries like South Africa begin to withdraw or renegotiate these treaties. We've seen countries like Indonesia and high-ranking officials in Germany and in India raising these concerns. Even in the body that represents U.S. state legislatures have.
Excuse me, one clarifying question: What treaties are you actually?
I'm talking, yeah, specifically about bilateral investment treaties or the investor protection sections of free trade agreements.
Okay.
And these raising concerns have been coming, and so my specific question is how these lessons are being translated into current discussions about investment protection on the continent.
Okay, and last question to the right.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Issa, and I'm from Mali. Actually, I just met Congresswoman Karen Bass outside, and told her what I was about to deliver while African Union members were around. She told me I still need to deliver my contribution since some member of African Union are still around. So we have been here talking about growth and opportunity in Africa. And then I do want to underline one growth which has been missing everywhere. This is demographic growth. It is said that in 10 years, Africa is going to be the most crowded continent around the world. And then we know that demographic growth needs to go in parallel with food self-sufficient. We Africans, we're not food self-sufficient at all. How to close that gap? We need to close that gap. And the only sector which can close that gap, this is agriculture. Back in 2003, in Maputo, African Union Summit, our leaders promised and declared they're going to invest at least 10% of our national budget in agriculture sector. Until now, only 5 countries are doing so. And he also said China owns 1/3 of our country. This is scary. If we don't go back to agriculture, we don't go back to our land. So by the time we'll go back, we'll find the market is tough, full, no way to get in. We have to attract young Africans to go to get some degree in agriculture, to invest in agriculture. This is my contribution, and things like a reminder.
Thank you. Let me repeat the 3 issues. One was about corruption and how it's viewed as a problem and what's being done about it. The second had to do with investor disputes. And the third is obviously the point that was just raised about population growth versus agricultural growth. And also, Her Excellency would like to make a comment on the local content question that came up a moment ago.
Well, very good. Thank you very much. Just a quick question, a quick reply about the local content. I think the local content is very, very important for Africa. Why? Because basically, we have to do contract negotiation that will include everybody. I think if we talk about inclusive growth, we have to talk about local content. When the companies come to invest in Africa, especially in the specific case of mining, we need to make sure that the people get the skill. We need to make sure that where the mining are located, infrastructure is created, such as hospital, education, school, and so forth. So I think it's very, very important, and it will bring less conflict to the continent, less conflict about mineral being cursed and so forth. So that's what I want to say. So we are working on contract negotiation. How do you negotiate contract? How do you beneficiate mineral resources? How do we ensure that local content is also taken care of? That's my comment on this one. The next one, I will talk more about especially the bilateral investment treaties. I agree with that comment. Actually, South Africa has problem with these bilateral investment treaties. And I think that what is happening is they want to make sure that they want to change their law to make sure that they also encourage minorities. Minorities is black African, South African after the apartheid. So actually, based on this, there are actually being sued in a court in Washington, D.C., and any company, any individual company can sue a whole country. So I think that this experience is being shared by all the African. Actually, we discussed that at the Minister of Trade in October of 2014. And I think that we need to learn lessons from that and to ensure that whatever that we're signing, we're really reading the fine print to ensure that we have the policy space to change our law and making sure that, you know, we do what we need to do. As far as corruption, I will touch into it a little bit. I think that corruption is viewed as a serious problem. Yes, it is viewed. I think that countries like Ethiopia, they're doing a lot of effort. There are other countries also, perhaps that the East Africa region is an example, and my colleague here can talk about them. But I think that right now, the more and more we go, for example, to international fora, the more and more we go to World Economic Forum and other forum, I think our head of state, our businesses are hearing more and more the concern about of the investors. And I think that we all want to attract investment, and I think that if we want to be serious about it, we have to address the issue of corruption. So I think that this is something that is very serious. We're working on it, but I think that some countries are making more progress than others. As far as the agriculture, I agree. We have this comprehensive CADEP, which is Agriculture Development for Africa. Countries are supposed to put 10%. You have said that it's only 5 countries. I do believe that actually more than 5 countries reach that 10%. However, we have issues about our statistics. I do believe that our statistics are not updated. However, I do agree with you that Africa has an advantage in agriculture. This is one thing that we have 60% of the arable land in Africa. We have our youth. We have to promote, first of all, our youth to work in agriculture. That's the first thing. The second thing is actually we have to make sure that we transform agriculture. We have to make sure that we open the border when, there is an excess somewhere, then the other country can also, be food secure, securing for ourselves. And I think that if we are very serious about agriculture development, we can also help to feed the world because we have the potential on agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Just very quickly.
Mr. Says-Bearer?
1, 2, 3.
Oh.
Yeah. On corruption, I just want to cover one aspect of it, that is a global problem. It's not just Africa's problem. We saw some report from EU where billions have been lost in corruption within the European Union itself. And the corruptors and corruptees are all over the globe. So it's not only Africa. Africa is doing what it can, but the whole world has to do something about it because it's a global problem. So this should be clear. It exists everywhere, but we hate it. But let's work together from a global point of view. On this question of treaties also, it's the question of capacity. Also, this is being tackled. And we were grateful that the G7 agreed to assist and build capacity in this regard, to negotiate agreements and treaties. And we are also grateful to the work of Extractive Industry Transparency International which is also contributing to some degree to this. So there is work that is being done to make sure that this does not continue, that there is a stop to it. Regarding agriculture, I agree, and I agree with my colleague. I only wanted to say, whenever I look at that declaration, 10%, I say it's not only how much you spend, but how you spend it, the quality of that expenditure. We reached that 10%, but it also counts on how it is being expended. It has to be expended in the most effective manner. Thank you very much.
Well, listen, to me, whether it is food security, corruption, or any other issue that you can raise, we have frameworks at the continental level. They exist. We are in agreement about what needs to be done. Now, the difference between those who succeed and those who do not is those who actually implement succeed. So the challenge for us is implementation. And that's what we are doing. We are seeing it across the continent, that those governments that actually sit down and implement succeed. Those that do not implement do not succeed. And so that is the cure for whatever issue people can raise. Africa knows what to do. We have to do it. We are doing it at different speeds, and I would say join us in doing it.
Great contribution. Judge.
Hello, my name is Judge Mary Terrell, and I've done a great deal of judicial training in many of the African countries, and my question is, whenever you talk about trade, marketing, investments, you cannot leave out the judiciary and the rule of law. They're inextricably linked. And so I want to hear from the panel in terms of what they see as their view, because as we move forward, AGOA, we've got to make sure that there are components in it that will give some comfort and confidence to investors as it relates to the judiciary, its independence, and the rule of law.
Thank you. And ma'am, to the right.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Huda Ibrahim. I'm from Somalia. My question is specific to the African Union and their role, what role they're playing in investing when the security is challenging and corruption is widespread. We know AU is doing peacekeeping in Somalia, which is not effective, I will say, because of the specific places that they are operating or staying. So I just want to get your I would just want to know what you have to say about that, the investment, when it comes to investment in the AU.
Okay, actually, we'll take one more, sir.
My name is Peter Gichuru. I'm the president and CEO of African Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank all of you. I am from the generation that came to America in the 60s. And my question is, what is that we need to do to increase manufacturing in Africa? And before I leave, I also wanted to say that I am from the home of Congressman G. McDermott, Washington State, and I want to thank the honorables here. I want to thank Your Excellencies, and I would like to encourage you also to think of the other parts of U.S. For example, Seattle, Washington, the home of Boeing, Microsoft. Let's do some of these forums there. Thank you.
And thank you, too. Well, actually, we just have one more, so we'll include you to the right.
I'm Bo Machayo. I work for Senator Gillibrand.
Speak up.
I'm Bo Machayo. I work for Senator Gillibrand, and I am actually a first-generation African-American. My mom's from Uganda, and my dad's from Kenya. And this question is actually directed to Dr. Sezibera. What do you see as the steps forward in terms of implementing the ultimate goal of a political federation with the East African community? And what role do you see diaspora Africans joining in together with Africans that are currently there to make that goal actually a fruition?
Okay, so I'll just repeat quickly. The 4 issues that were raised are about the role of the judiciary and the rule of law, the role of the AU, if you could explain further. Also, manufacturing in Africa, what are some of the prospects? And finally, the last question about the diaspora and the Continental Free Trade Agreement area.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that the first question, I think it's an important question. I think that AGOA is a preference for Africa, and actually there is an eligibility criteria. And actually when you talk about the eligibility criteria, you're talking about judiciary, you're talking about the rule of law. So I think that there is a criteria for qualification. Our issue as Africa is, I think we agree with this, our issue in Africa is that when there is a violation, sometimes it's interrupting order. We're cutting in a way that actually the private sector that is dealing, the businesses that are dealing, that has nothing to do with it, is sometimes very difficult for us. So I think that it's important to have enough warning. It's important to solve the issues before it gets there. But we agree that actually the judiciary should be there. As far as, Huda, from Somalia, I'm not really sure I understood your question. You said the peacekeeping in Somalia is not working because of the specific location. Yes, I think that, some of our staff were located originally in Kenya, but they're in actually Somalia. So as far as we know, I'm not the Commissioner of Peace and Security, but as far as we know, I think that our people are there, they're doing a job, but I think that this is something that perhaps you can get more information and transmit it to the proper commissioner, but perhaps my colleague can say something about that. Manufacturing in Africa, again, my colleague will comment more on that, but I think that really to encourage transformation in Africa. That's what actually creates manufacturing, job creation, all the stuff. That's what we need, transform in Africa. Our youth needs to get this. Our population needs this. It will help us with a lot of issues, illegal immigration, all that stuff, because we're not transforming in Africa. And I think that that's what we need to focus on. The value addition in Africa, how do we beneficiate our mineral, how do we transform our agriculture so that we can also be food secure and so forth. I think that's what's happened. The other one, I think, is a specific question to my colleague here, so he can respond to it. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Marabel.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. On the independence of judicial and rule of law, we totally agree. And we are working very hard to all of us in Africa to try to make sure that this happens. That has to be there. Remember, it was one of the conditions that I mentioned for development, governance, all that, and we said rule of law and functioning institutions. And the judiciary is one of those essential institutions that must function properly. Now, whether it's included in AGOA or not, it doesn't matter, but it's all agreed that that has to be in place. I will not comment on Somalia. I think the African Union and the rest of the international world is doing all it can to make sure that Somalia stabilizes and that there is development there, to make sure that there is distribution, inclusiveness, and that will prevent further internal conflict. On manufacturing, there are all those things that we mentioned under the transformative and inclusive growth. But I want to put an accent on science and technology and innovation. Emphasis on that. It can be technology transfer, it can be diffusion, or it can be the development of technology. Of course, you need investment, you need human capital, which is involved in human development, education, health, and so on, because people who are healthy, who are well-trained, of course, are more productive. You need markets where once you have added value, you will be able to dispose of or to sell the products. It's a whole array of things that we have mentioned, actually, under transformative growth. But I will leave of course, the other one is entirely to my colleague on the right, on political federation and the diaspora and so on. Thank you very much.
We in East Africa, want to grow manufacturing as a percentage of GDP from 10 to 40%. We have asked the manufacturers in East Africa what they need from us, what they need to get this done, and they have told us they need 4 things, which I will mention, and we are working on. One is energy, to lower the cost. The second is infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure to move their goods and the inputs into the industry. The third is a change in labor laws to allow for labor mobility across our countries. And the fourth is domestic tax harmonization. Domestic tax harmonization, especially harmonization around excise duty, VAT, and income tax. So those are the 4 things they have told us, and those are the ones we are working on. They think we can hit that target if we address these constraints. On the political federation, for those of you who are not aware, East Africa is the only region on our continent with an explicit aim of forming a political federation of the constituent member states. So the 5 countries have decided they want to form a political federation. We have advanced very far, and in fact, we are now working on a process for a constitution-making process for the political federation. And we will begin, this constitution-making process is scheduled to begin next year, January 2015. And so I urge you, those in the diaspora who want to participate in this process, please join us. You can join us online. Let us know your thoughts. We'll have a model of the political federation. Study it, give us your thoughts. And for those of you who want to be the first presidents of the East African Political Federation, get ready. Yeah, it's coming. Thank you.
Well, what a lovely concept to close on. I defer to the member for final closing remarks, and we are just so privileged to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you especially for your patience throughout the day, as we had a number of members of Congress come through, and also your patience with the line in terms of asking questions or making your comments. I just want to thank everyone for attending, and just hope that there's other opportunities this week that you have to participate in this incredibly historic occasion of the first ever in U.S. history Africa Summit. And join me in a round of applause for our wonderful moderator and panelists. Thank you. Thank you. And we will see you in September at the Congressional Black Caucus Leadership Forum, where we will do a look back at the summit, what was learned, what was gained, what happened, what didn't happen. Thank you very much.
Can we take a picture with you? Yeah.
Huh?
Well, yeah, I think all of us together.
Thank you very much.
Shall we come over there?